561, White Tower and White Tombstone. The two small boats reached the island in the middle of the lake almost at the same time. 4 people jumped from the boats to the shore in quick succession. Scott looked up at the apple trees heavy with fruit and breathed in the distinct sweet scent. "Aren't you coming?" Medea asked softly as she stepped to his side. Scott looked at her. "What about you?" Medea smiled. "Let's go." She led the way into the orchard. "We'll see you later." Aaron waved to Scott and Savannah and followed Medea. Their figures quickly vanished among the trees. Scott lingered, curious. "Is there something special about these apples?" Savannah only smiled. She stood on tiptoe, picked an apple, and bit into it. "Delicious." Scott plucked one too and examined it. The skin was flawless, a brilliant red with not a speck of dust. This wasn't a wild patch of trees. It looked tended with care. He bit into it and his eyes widened. The flesh was crisp, full of juice. The sweetness and aroma were unlike anything he'd tasted before. He ate faster. One apple vanished quickly, and with it came a sudden lift. His hunger sated and the fatigue drained away as if by miracle. These really aren't ordinary apples. He stared at the trees. The effect trumped any stamina potion he knew, not to mention the flavor. Can this orchard be transplanted? He imagined bringing it into Odin's eye. Savannah smiled. Yes. Scott's face lit up, but she added, "You'd need a druid to tend them." His excitement deflated a little. Savannah stroked a trunk. A green light flashed across her palm. "Don't be too disappointed. You might transplant them without a druid, but those apples would only be about a fifth as potent as the ones here." "A fifth is enough," Scott said, satisfied. "We'll talk about it later." He tossed his core aside and followed her. With no straight path, they threaded through the trees and eventually reached the island's center. The clearing was small, smaller than a classroom. But Mordred wasn't there, nor were Medea and Aaron. There was no tomb of King Arthur, only an unremarkable patch of weeds. The only notable thing was a white square stone set in the middle of the grass. "Is this a second-level space?" Scott asked, stepping forward. Footprints marked the stone's smooth surface. Savannah frowned. "Looks like it could teleport you somewhere else." "Then let's try it." Scott reached out. They took each other's hands and stood on the square. A flash of light erupted, and Scott felt his body thrust upward. Not a gentle lift, but as if grabbed and hurled by a force he couldn't resist. He clung to Savannah to avoid being torn away. The strange flight didn't last long. They were violently dumped into a bed of flowers. The familiar floral scent hit him, and it took Scott a moment to gather himself. In front of them lay the same sea of flowers he'd seen when he met Merlin in a dream. "This is..." Savannah's voice was full of shock. Scott's eyes went to a white tower rising in the distance, something that had not been in the dream world. "Let's go." He started walking toward it, then found himself running. He didn't know why, so he didn't question it. He followed the impulse. Speed built until he shifted into a peregrine falcon and flew at maximum pace. Savannah changed into an eagle and pursued. They arrived quickly at the pure white, flawless tower. It had a single entrance at its base, no windows or other openings. Scott landed at the doorway and became human again. Savannah came in beside him. On one side of the tower stood a pure white tombstone, and a bright silver knight's spear was thrust into the ground before it. Scott stepped to the tombstone. Only one line was carved into its smooth face. "Eternal King Arthur rests here." The knight's spear. Savannah murmured, puzzled. "What is going on? Where is Mordred?" Scott looked at the spear. It seemed cleansed by some power. There was no trace of blood. He shook his head and turned to the tower. "We can find answers inside." He bowed once to the tombstone out of habit and walked into the tower, Savannah at his heels. The first thing they saw was bronze. Click, click, the sound of countless mechanisms. Scott stared at a gigantic contraption. Ringed bronze plates spun at different speeds and in different directions, and at the center hung a huge bronze eye. "This is the 1,000-mile eyes." Medea's voice came from above. Scott looked up to see her leaning over the upper entrance, looking down. "You're not surprised at all. You really do know a lot." Scott gave a non-committal shrug. "Can it still see the future?" "No," Medea said. "Its power has been exhausted." She turned and walked back into the upper floor entrance. Scott watched her disappear and smiled faintly. "Shall we go up?" Savannah asked. "No." Scott raised an eyebrow. Let's leave. Savannah didn't press. They exited the tower and kept walking until they stood again in the boundless sea of flowers, the white tower a pale column on the horizon. This isn't quite what I expected, Scott admitted, but we'll see. Savannah nodded, planted her staff in the ground, and tapped. Thick green vines rose and wove together into a simple, elegant table and chairs. Please sit. Thanks. Scott produced a stack of snacks and drinks with a grin. A figure materialized silently and took the remaining chair. Aren't you curious? Merlin still looked two-dimensional, lounging with one elbow on the armrest, chin cupped in his palm, a smile playing at the corners of his eyes. Scott smiled back. We'll know soon enough. Indeed. Merlin blinked and vanished like a phantom. Savannah hadn't noticed him at all. Not long after, Medea and Aaron emerged from the tower, followed by a swirl of black mist. An old voice echoed from the mist. Is that the boy? The non-existent one you mentioned? Yes, Medea answered. Father. The mist coalesced, trailing a flurry of petals, and formed an illusory head in the air, bald, with a pointed mouth, monkey-like cheeks, and a long beard. It was exactly like the statue of Salazar Slytherin in Hogwarts' Chamber of Secrets. The black eyes opened wide, and the head ignored Savannah, fixing instead on Scott. I am Salazar Slytherin, it announced. Since you were also a Hogwarts student, stand and bow to me. Scott offered only a small, polite smile. Sorry, I'm a Ravenclaw. Rowena's student? Salazar narrowed his gaze. Or just from Ravenclaw? Both, Scott said. He lifted a hand and a small, blank picture frame floated up, holding a painted image. Long time no see, Salazar. Rowena's face appeared in the painting, dignified and composed despite a millennium's passage. Salazar glanced at the portrait with disdain. If it were the real Rowena, I might converse properly, but I have no interest in a painted likeness. Rowena did not bristle. I do not intend to converse with you either, Salazar, she said calmly. I'm merely a witness. A witness? He smirked. I thought you came to plead for your student. No need, Rowena replied. I believe in my student. Salazar snorted. A student taught by a portrait? You should know even the real Rowena would not have power to threaten me. Rowena remained serene and smiling. Salazar sneered. You're as insufferable as Rowena herself, always thinking yourself clever. Then he looked at Scott. Your student would fare better in Slytherin. Scott shrugged. Thank you for the compliment, but both my parents were Muggles. Slytherin wouldn't suit me. Salazar frowned and turned to Medea. After a millennium, does the church still threaten wizards? Medea shook her head. No, the church has lost its great armaments and its memory of wizards. Now it only influences Muggles. Salazar turned back to Scott. Then why retain purity of blood requirements? Tradition, perhaps. Scott shrugged. Foolishness. Salazar gave a brief, dismissive assessment and soon lost interest. He drifted down toward King Arthur's tombstone. Medea stepped between him and Scott, smiling faintly. If you want to stop them, it's not too late. Why would I stop them? Scott returned her smile. As long as you don't regret it. Medea fell silent and walked toward the tombstone. Aaron lingered, settling into the empty chair with a grin and a look that swept Scott and Savannah. You still say you're not interested in my sister? He teased Scott. Before Scott could answer, Savannah sprang up, snatched her staff, and brought it down hard on Aaron's head. Ah! He yelled theatrically, tumbling from the chair and rolling away. He scrambled to avoid another blow. Stop hitting me, I'm sorry. He leapt up and made a break for Medea, but then slowed, turned, and pulled a face before following after her. Scott and Savannah paid him no mind and walked on toward the tombstone. By then, Salazar's mist had gathered above the white slab. The black head dissolved into a denser fog. Medea stepped to the tombstone and extended her left hand. From the skin of her palm, a pale white protrusion appeared, a bone-like shard. She gripped it with her right hand and drew free a small, pale, bone-shaped vial from the flesh of her palm. Aaron unbuckled the short wooden stave at his waist and took his position by her side. Now, Salazar commanded. Medea and Aaron raised their wands. A red beam and a green beam collided and braided into a white lightning bolt. Boom! The bolt struck the flawless tombstone, leaving charred marks. Boom, boom, more bolts hammered at it. Savannah watched, uneasy. Is it really okay to just stand here? She demanded. That's King Arthur's tombstone. Scott shook his head. We're not his subjects. We never swore ourselves to him. If even Merlin did not intervene, what business did he have, a person from a later age, have to interfere? But Savannah couldn't keep from watching, anger writ plain on her face. The lightning continued until a hairline fissure appeared in the thick stone. It widened and spidered across the surface until the entire slab was fractured. With a final, thunderous strike, the Eternal King's tombstone crumbled and collapsed. Medea and Aaron picked up their wands. The thin black mist that had been hovering over the tombstone sank into the shattered slab and vanished. For a long moment after, there was only silence. Are King Arthur's remains really here? What secrets are they hiding? Savannah murmured. We'll find out if we keep watching, Scott replied. Savannah's voice trembled. Aren't you afraid you'll lose control if we don't stop them now? It's a gamble, Scott said evenly. Even if I lose, I can still save us. Savannah grew more anxious. If we lose too much, what's the point of saving our lives? Scott smiled and rose to his feet. What's the matter? She looked up at him. He said, If you're that worried, come with me. Let's take a look. All right. Savannah nodded, gripped her long wooden staff, and stood. They left the tables and chairs among the sea of flowers and strolled slowly toward the broken tombstone. Medea and Aaron watched them from a distance until they closed the gap. Medea raised her wand, and a red beam shot out, striking the ground at Scott's feet and turning a cluster of bright blooms into dust. Stop right there, Scott. She kept the white bone wand trained on him. I warned you earlier. You didn't listen. Now you can't come any closer. Aaron grinned. We'll do our best to stop you. Scott stared at the shattered stone in the deep cavity it had revealed. He inhaled as if tasting the air. Such dense magic, he said. It's incredible. He could feel an enormous reservoir of power brewing in the cavern beneath the tomb. It hadn't erupted yet, but even its leaked currents made his heart race. We're only curious. We want to see more closely, he said. Medea didn't lower her wand. Stay where you are. Scott reached out and gently stopped Savannah. Okay, he said readily. But it's fine. Savannah frowned, then looked into his eyes. After a moment's hesitation, she gave a small, reluctant nod. Scott withdrew his hand. How obedient, my dear sister, Aaron quipped at the perfect moment. Savannah tightened her grip on the staff, ignored him, and kept her head down. Scott didn't bother replying to Aaron. Instead, he turned polite attention to Medea. And you? Aren't you going to do anything, madam? Medea's smile was flawless. I don't know what you mean. Is it to win father's approval? Scott assumed the pose of the indulgent older brother to needle her. Honestly, I don't get it. With your achievements, if you can't be called a genius, then what would be? Medea's composed face flickered. Resentment flashed across it for a heartbeat before she smoothed it away. Scott had been watching closely and saw it. Of course, it's people like you, Scott. You're the true genius. She praised him as if there were no sharpness between them. My accomplishments mean nothing. They took me a lifetime. At your age, I was far behind what you are now. You're too modest. Scott's smile was comforting and deliberately practiced. I was just lucky. He saw Medea's fingers tighten on her wand. She continued to heap praise. No, you're a true genius, no doubt about it. Scott returned the courtesy with exaggerated gravity. Even a genius can't compare to you. To be reborn after 1,000 years, what you achieved is beyond ordinary wizards. Stop it. You're both geniuses. Aaron put on an exaggerated, tear-wiping pose. I'm just an ordinary fellow. How could I possibly compete with my sister 10 years younger than me? Glad you recognize that. Savannah's voice was cold and clipped. Stop. I know I'm worthless. Boo-hoo-hoo. Aaron pretended to sob. You're right. Savannah's face twisted with contempt. Slytherin is about to appear. She spoke the name like an accusation. Scott glanced at Medea, smiling. Medea held his gaze for a few seconds, then turned to watch the hole beneath the tombstone. Scott could now feel the magic in the cavern surging. It seemed on the verge of bursting. At the critical moment, though, the violent fluctuations smoothed out. Thin wisps of black mist rose from the earth, at first like a sheer veil, then thickening and darkening until it billowed into the air like smoke, taller than the white tower beside them. A fierce wind blew from the depths, wailing as it scattered the ink-black cloud and whipped Medea's dark green skirt. As the mist thinned, a figure emerged from the hole. He raised his hand as if to clench a fist. The black fog dissolved in an instant. Standing on the fragments of the tombstone was a young man in a crown and splendid robes, gold hair, blue eyes, chiseled handsome features, tall and sturdy, carrying an imposing, steady presence. His skin, however, had an alarming pallor, translucent enough to show dark veins beneath, giving him an uncanny, almost unnatural look. "Father?" Medea managed to say. He nodded once. Scott and Savannah exchanged a quick look. Did he take King Arthur's body? Was the Eternal King really that young when he died? Savannah whispered. Scott shook his head. The golden-haired man regarded them sharply. Even Savannah's whisper carried to him. Of course he wasn't that young when he died. He advanced with slow, deliberate steps, as though reacquainting himself with his limbs. After 1,000 years of magical nourishment, this body has grown young again. He walked to a bright silver knight's spear planted among the rubble, drew it free, turned it in his hand, and nodded in approval. Magical nourishment? Scott's curiosity got the better of him. Did someone arrange this at Arthur's burial, set things up to resurrect him? It was Morgan and the fair folk of Avalon, the man answered. He rested the spear on the ground and let his frayed cloak lift in the wind. You've heard the legend of the Eternal King? People say Arthur did not truly die, that he will one day return to save the world. "Heh," Scott said. "Even if the body's preserved, what of the soul? Can anyone take a soul back from death?" "They preserved his soul," the man replied, "but 1,000 years ago it dispersed." "Was it you?" Savannah asked. "It was me." He admitted it easily. "I took what they managed to preserve." Scott said, "So it's not a complete resurrection yet." "No." The man closed his hand again around the spear. "I can use the body, but I am not truly alive. If I leave this place, the flesh will rot like any corpse unless a ritual completes the rebirth." Father had prepared another ritual, Medea said. If it succeeds, he'll be fully reborn and truly immortal. Scott nodded. So Slytherin seeks immortality. Seeking immortality is not a shameful thing. The man's tone was calm. "I have always wanted more time. I have tried many methods, horcruxes, elixirs made from the Philosopher's Stone, but none satisfied. What I pursue is perfect immortality." Scott nodded in understanding. "I get it. Horcruxes and elixirs aren't things I chase either." Slytherin, if that was the name, laughed. "What, would you seek it too?" "Not yet," Scott answered honestly. "Maybe when I'm older." "A pity," Slytherin said. Scott looked puzzled. "For a genius like you, it would have been interesting to see if you could achieve it. A long life would be a fine thing if shared." His voice was suddenly almost sincere. "But because I want immortality, you must die." Scott cut to the chase. "Am I this so-called non-existent person, one of the materials in the ritual?" Slytherin nodded. "An unexpectedly valuable material, both an accident and a pleasant surprise." "How honored I am," Scott pouted theatrically. Medea added, "The ritual needs many precious ingredients. The most important is enough power to deviate destiny." Scott clapped his hands. Old Slytherin found Merlin's 1,000-mile eyes, saw destiny 1,000 years ahead, and recorded it in the scroll of history. "You planned for Medea to awaken 1,000 years later," Slytherin continued, watching Scott. "Her task was to destroy the predetermined destinies in the scroll and gather enough destiny-defying power. And I wasn't recorded in the scroll of history," Scott said. "My appearance was an accident, perhaps even a miracle." He slapped his palm once for emphasis, grinning with self-adoration. "Isn't that marvelous?" "Well said." Slytherin actually applauded, then let go of the spear. "I didn't expect you to understand so much, yet come before me voluntarily. That forces one to praise your courage." He looked at Scott with genuine appreciation. "What a pity." "No pity here." Scott made a show of humility. "Your plan took 1,000 years to prepare, and your father-daughter bond is touching, but I won't sacrifice myself for you. I'm not that noble." "That's fine. You don't have to volunteer." Slytherin's tone was considerate. "I will take what I need myself." He seized the spear once more and pulled it from the ground. Scott watched closely. "If I'm not wrong, you can do magic." "Of course." Slytherin unfastened the long cloak trailing behind him. "King Arthur could use magic." "Was Merlin his teacher?" Scott asked. "That was an age when wizards and muggles lived together. Many rulers were wizards." Slytherin took a couple of steps closer and lifted the spear. Though clearly a heavy weapon, it seemed weightless in his grip. Its tip pulsed with a faint glow as magical currents gathered there. Scott reacted in an instant. He grabbed Savannah, and they vanished from where they stood. A split second too late, Slytherin charged, spear in man, to the exact spot they had occupied. Had they not left, Scott would have been impaled through the chest. That was too close. When they reappeared a short distance away, Scott looked shaken. A little more, and I'd be dead. No. Slytherin's voice was sharp with intent. I will ensure you live. You will serve the ritual better alive. No, he glanced at Scott's feet and spotted a black feather half hidden in the flowers. No wonder Medea praises you so highly, he said with feeling. Your command of spatial magic puts to shame many who have spent their lives studying it. Scott feigned modesty. Just a few clever tricks. Medea is the true genius. No ordinary person compares. Medea is not a genius. Slytherin's voice was flat. Even if she spent her whole life, she couldn't break that barrier. That didn't surprise me. What surprised me was that you have achieved it so young, younger than I ever did. Scott couldn't help a sympathetic glance toward Medea. Her expression shifted again, tighter, darker. Medea's expression flickered for an instant. Scott caught the dissatisfaction aimed at Slytherin. That was enough. Too much prodding could backfire, so he stopped trying to steer Slytherin into saying worse things about Medea. Slytherin, however, had already found the trick Scott had concealed in the flower bed and reacted at once. He lifted the knight's spear. Black flame burst along its length, swallowing the front half. He drove the spear into the ground. The black fire exploded outward, racing across the lawn. Where it passed, flowers and grass turned to ash. The black feathers Scott had hidden beneath the blooms were consumed as well. Siren, Scott barked, pointing his wand. With a splash, the fish-headed, human-bodied Siren rose, scale-covered hands thrusting outward. Water surged from the creature, forming towering waves aimed at the spreading black flames. Hissing steam rose where water met fire, shrouding the scene. Golzan! Scott called. The lizardman Golzan tunneled up from the soil, squatting and slamming its hands down. The earth in front of them heaved, the ground sinking inside the area the black flames had scorched. Water sluiced into the new depression. Slytherin leapt high, clearing the pit as the land collapsed beneath him, landing amid a spray of shredded petals. He watched Siren and Golzan with an appraising look. These alchemy puppets you made? Scott shook his head. My specialty is transfiguration. He flicked his wand. The ground beneath Slytherin swelled into a giant mud hand and came down hard. Petals scattered, dust billowed, but Slytherin didn't dodge. He planted his spear and, shimmering with unleashed magic, pierced through the mud hand as if it were nothing. Savannah wasn't idle. Thick green vines burst up around Slytherin, weaving into a cage. Scott had already summoned Edgar. The bird flapped over the cage and thrust its hands up. Flames roared, igniting the vine prison. Slytherin erupted through fire and wood, spear flashing as he lunged toward Scott. Golzan slammed again. The ground rose and compressed into several thick walls, trying to block Slytherin's charge. He busted through the first wall easily. Scott pointed, and the nearer walls shifted. Mud darkened to steel, their surfaces sprouting spikes longer than Slytherin's spear. After he crashed through 3 walls, the final barrier had become a bristling steel hedgehog. Slytherin halted, leapt onto the wall's summit, and looked down. His blue eyes seemed to glow. For a breathless second, Scott felt his thoughts blur as if his soul were being tugged. He snapped his eyes shut and slammed into occlumency. To combine Imperio and Legilimency into a single gaze, Slytherin observed, making it almost impossible to guard against, worthy of Salazar Slytherin. He sounded genuinely impressed. Scott remained cautious. Slytherin's voice softened. You didn't use Medea to betray me? Scott's heart skipped. He didn't show it. Betrayal? He echoed, pretending surprise. You needn't put on a show, Slytherin said, confident. Whether it's you or Medea, your intentions are transparent to me. Scott began to worry. Occlumency had failed. Slytherin laughed, though kindly. No, your mind resisted. I couldn't read it directly, but I perceive magic. Combined with your expressions, I can guess a lot. He glanced at Savannah. Your druid soul is merged with nature. I can't pry your thoughts by sensing magic changes. Savannah stepped forward. I'm fine, she said. A druid priest's soul is rooted to the world. It's not easy to breach. She wove a quiet counter-enchantment over Scott. You can open your eyes. Scott did and met Slytherin's gaze again. Slytherin sounded almost regretful. You have strong magic perception. Closing your eyes did little. Scott looked toward Medea. Slytherin added, strong perception comes from a powerful soul, Scott. Scott answered aloud, thank you, while inwardly he wondered why Medea still held back. Slytherin, intrigued, asked Medea, were you always expected to act this way, my daughter? If you could genuinely replace me, I might even be proud. Medea's lips curved in a brief smile, then faded. Pride? She repeated softly. Once, perhaps, but after witnessing birth, aging, sickness, death for 1,000 years, that desire for my father's approval died long ago. Slytherin's eyes cooled. Then be a good daughter as before. I am, Medea said. She snapped her free hand. At the same instant, Scott felt pressure at his left wrist. The silver snake-shaped necklace he'd worn, he thought a simple trinket, burst to life. It unfurled into a gigantic silver serpent, coiling around him with terrifying speed. Its tail whipped his wand from his grip. Its head closed around his throat, cold fangs pressing into his skin. Scott! Savannah tried to rush forward, but vines erupted and barred her path. Aaron stepped up with a grin. Your opponent is me, dear sister. Savannah glared. So that was your plan. Scott tried to draw breath through the snake's grip. I checked this necklace many times, he said to Medea, his voice tight. Dumbledore checked it too. We found nothing. Medea moved closer, expression serene. I didn't underestimate you. I knew you'd examine it and find nothing. That was why I could give it so confidently. She uncoiled a small box and took from it a number of red, disposable philosopher's stones. As she began arranging them and preparing a ritual, Scott felt the fangs pierce his throat. Blood trickled. It's not an ordinary alchemical piece, she told him. I used the flesh and soul of an Anglo-silver snake. The Anglo-silver snake? Scott had never heard of such a thing. Savannah answered grimly. An extinct magical creature, silver metallic scales, able to grow or shrink at will. I missed it, Scott admitted. Dumbledore and I checked runes and enchantments. We looked at magical circuits. We were negligent. That was your only avenue, Medea said. Traditional alchemy wouldn't use a being's soul as material. From above, Slytherin addressed the floating portrait of Rowena Ravenclaw. You taught him scholarship, true to Rowena, yet not practical combat. Ravenclaw's portrait merely chuckled. Slytherin turned back. Wizards of your era live too comfortably. No clear enemies, only domestic strife. It seems the church has its purposes, Medea murmured. Slytherin, it's time, she said, and began the ritual in earnest. Aaron, meanwhile, transformed into a huge gray wolf and lunged at Savannah. Vines entangled their struggle, but Savannah's clerical authority quickly reasserted itself. The wolf rolled and subsided, and Aaron reverted to human form, sheepish. Sorry, I forgot about a priest's dominion over ordinary druids, he laughed, then obeyed when Medea called him back. Scott forced a strained smile at Savannah. They need me alive, for now, he said. Savannah's eyes flashed. She nearly broke free, but the vines and Aaron's presence held. Medea gave him a cold look. If he becomes a problem, his death will not inconvenience us, though I prefer him whole. Savannah froze. Scott's gaze to her was pleading. She steadied herself. Aaron lounged on the ground, chin on his hands, fascinated. Any more tricks up your sleeve, Scott? Or are you still waiting for Miss Slytherin to betray her father? Medea glanced at Aaron. He covered his mouth instantly, as if to stop his own teasing. The ritual continued to be set in place, red stones glinting, and Scott found himself bound by a living serpent and the fragile, dangerous calm of enemies who knew each other's strengths all too well. Scott watched with cold eyes as Medea set up the ritual with swift, practiced movements, piling disposable philosopher's stones and other reagents into place. Finally, she took off the necklace she had been wearing, a silver chain with a small crystal hourglass pendant. She held it up and gave it a shake. The previously still blue grains of sand inside rose and floated, revealing a dazzling, flowing brilliance. Only then did Scott remember. The necklace had appeared suddenly. Medea hadn't been wearing it before. Even when she had entered the White Tower's second floor earlier, it hadn't been at her throat. Had she taken it from somewhere in the tower? She walked to him, placed the necklace on his head. What is this? He asked. The power of fate deviation, Medea answered with a smile. Scott raised an eyebrow. The power of fate deviation? I thought that was ethereal, invisible, intangible. You're right. Medea nodded. But because of the 1,000-mile eyes here, my father set things in motion 1,000 years ago. He finally collected enough material to trigger a ritual. So this isn't the true power of fate deviation, Scott said, but a physical magic artifact born from a deviation in fate. Exactly. Medea extended a finger and wiped the blood from Scott's neck, then smeared the same blood across her lips. It's real. She licked her blood-stained lips. I thought it was that Mercury-like alchemy doll impersonating me again. This time I wasn't careful enough, Scott muttered, annoyed. Medea said nothing more. She waved her wand and Scott's body lifted and was forced into the center of the arranged ritual. At the same moment, Slytherin strode into the ritual's range. He looked at Scott, trapped by the silver snake, and smiled with a cold curl at the edges of his mouth. The rest is up to you, Medea. Yes, father. Scott, Savannah cried again, frantic, but Aaron stepped in front of her. Get out of the way, he barked. Savannah struck the ground with her long wooden staff. Before Aaron could react, countless thorny vines erupted and wrapped around him, the thorns slicing into his flesh. Blood covered him instantly. Despite the pain, Aaron tried to smile. My dear sister, you truly are ruthless, he rasped. Feathers began to sprout across his body as he started to transform, but Savannah struck him with another spell and interrupted the process. She spared him no further glance and charged at the ritual, staff in hand. It was already too late. Medea activated the ritual. In an instant, Scott, Slytherin, and Medea herself were bathed in distorted prismatic light. The ground and air around them twisted. The place they stood seemed to become another dimension. Scott watched the light and saw countless distorted figures flicker within it, as if they were beings trapped and writhing in the cruel grip of fate. Scott, Savannah shouted from outside the distortion. He could no longer see her clearly, just flashes of green as she attacked the barrier, which had no effect. His 3 summoned beasts who had leapt forward to help were helpless as well. Even Golzin, who could reshape terrain, could not break the active ritual. Inside the light, the red disposable philosopher's stones began to melt first, turning into an astonishingly thick blood that shimmered like polished gems. Other materials melted and bled color into the mass. Reds, blues, blacks, and golds splashed together. Then the gem-like blood absorbed them all until everything ran the same fierce crimson. The liquid thickened into a viscous, shining stream and spread across the floor in a complex, indecipherable pattern. Medea retreated to the pattern's edge, and with the sharp tip of her bone wand, sliced her porcelain wrist. She squeezed, and a few drops of her blood, more like a potion saturated with magic than ordinary blood, fell into the crimson design. The pattern glowed. The blood began to churn, then lengthen into countless crimson snakes. They writhed and rose upright, dancing across the ground. The snakes coiled and slithered until they surrounded Scott and Slytherin. The silver snake that had wrapped Scott contracted and snapped back into the shape of a necklace, flying to Medea's hand. But Scott was then layered in coils of blood-red serpents until only his eyes showed. Medea tossed the necklace aside and stepped into the ritual among the writhing snakes, scattering a few handfuls of disposable stones and adding other reagents with effortless movements. Scott watched her, then winked at Slytherin. You truly aren't without ambition, Medea. Slytherin's lips barely moved, but his voice vibrated the air with magic, a skill Scott had been quietly learning. Your shrewd father must have anticipated this long ago, Medea said calmly as she rearranged the ritual. You are my daughter, Slytherin replied. Faced with such temptation, how could you do nothing? But you did nothing, or at least you seemed to let me do everything. Medea straightened and looked at him. Or perhaps you have absolute confidence my plan will fail, Slytherin chuckled. Do you think this level is enough to trap me, Medea? His magic flared, and inch by inch the blood-red snakes wrapped around him began to disintegrate. Of course not, he said. Medea spoke a 2-syllable spell so low Scott barely heard it. Instantly, a familiar blood-red light wrapped Slytherin. Arthur! Someone cried. A pillar of red shot into the sky and receded. When it faded, Mordred stood there in worn armor, gripping a knight's spear in one hand. With the other, he had plunged through Slytherin's left chest and held a still-beating black heart aloft. Arthur! Arthur! Ah! He laughed, head thrown back, clutching the heart. Slytherin coughed. Pure black blood dribbled from the corner of his mouth. The white skin of his face grew more translucent, and the black veins beneath bulged grotesquely. "Well done. Cough, Medea," he croaked. Medea didn't glance at him. She had used the distraction to shift the ritual into a new configuration. Scott, using the air-vibrating magic Slytherin used, managed to voice a question. "Splendid. Was the rebellious Mordred your doing?" It sounded unbelievable. Scott and Savannah had encountered Mordred just as he landed on the island, only a few steps behind Medea. How could she have arranged his appearance so quickly? It didn't fit Medea's careful style unless... Did you prepare this beforehand? Did you enter Avalon before this? Scott pressed. Who knows? Medea smiled enigmatically and refused to answer directly. Then she reactivated the ritual. The crimson snakes thinned into innumerable fine threads that tangled into a chaotic web. Like cocoon silk, they wrapped every living thing inside, and Scott felt his magic and stamina being sucked away through the threads. He shut his eyes as the world turned to a crimson blur. A silvery sheen spread from his collar and quickly enveloped him. His body lightened, and a moment later he was standing outside the ritual, in front of Golzan. "Scott, you're okay." Savannah rushed to him and hugged him fiercely. A thin film of that mercury-like substance peeled back from his face and hands and shrank into his collar and cuffs. "Of course I'm fine," Scott said through a sharp inhale. The hug had nearly dislocated his arm. Savannah let go at once. She scanned him over. "How did you manage that?" "Simple," Scott said with a smile. "I had Golzan summon me. Our magic contract lets us call each other." He didn't elaborate, and instead looked back toward the still active ritual. Through the distorted light, he could see 3 giant blood cocoons, the largest encasing Slytherin and Mordred, the smallest the one he had escaped from. "Should we destroy it?" Savannah asked. "Of course." Scott took the wand Savannah handed him and waved it once. The last of his summoned beasts, Horus, appeared, gold-feathered, wings on its back, an eagle-beaked mask over its face like Edgar. "Wind, fire, water, earth," Scott commanded. The 4 summoned beasts took positions at the ritual's cardinal points and unleashed swirling magic of blue, black, red, and yellow. "Gungnir," Scott cried. He struggled slightly as he cast, that single word shaping the converging power into 4 long spears. The blue wind spear for sharpness, the black water spear for dissolution, the red fire spear for eruption, and the yellow earth spear for crushing pressure. "Go!" He brought his wand down hard, and the 4 colored lights streaked together and struck the ritual. The attack expanded, then compressed into a pure black sphere. Cracks spidered across its surface, and blinding white light leaked through. "Protego!" Scott raised his wand again, and an invisible shield sprang up around him and Savannah. The black sphere continued to fracture until it shattered completely. No sound came, only endless white light that washed over everything and made the world go pure white for a few heartbeats. Scott pulled out sunglasses and put them on until the light receded. When he could see again, the ritual was gone, and the 3 blood cocoons had been destroyed. Medea and Slytherin were on their knees, weakened. Medea looked a little better. Her lips bled, but her complexion had warmed. Slytherin clutched at his chest. Having somehow pushed the heart Mordred had torn out back into place, Mordred himself had vanished. The knight's spear lay snapped in 2 on the ground. Scott took a few steps forward and looked down at them. "It seems I won," he said flatly. Slytherin looked up at him and then at the summoned beasts standing nearby. "Summoning magic?" he said with a thin smile. "A clever idea." Scott only sighed. "Looks like it's not over yet." Scott watched as the Slytherin father and daughter rose again. Medea brought a hand up to wipe blood from the corner of her mouth, looked at her palm, and then, almost shyly, smiled. Salazar lowered his hand from his chest. His pierced flesh had seamed over, only faint scars remained. "You've gained a lot, Medea," Scott said, then probed her with his magic sense. The magic within her had increased dramatically. Compared to the doll-like shell she had been earlier, she was closer to being truly human, though not fully restored. Scott had interrupted the ritual. That was why her flesh and blood body wasn't complete. Medea lowered her hand and met Scott's gaze. "It still didn't achieve what I wanted," she said quietly. Salazar chuckled. "You trusted this boy too easily, Medea. You didn't investigate him properly." Medea's condition was better than Salazar's. He had nearly lost his heart in Mordred's ambush and then had his power siphoned by Medea's ritual. He was visibly diminished. "It's hard to investigate everything about myself," Scott said for Medea. "Only I know my own abilities." Salazar only smirked and said nothing more. For a while, the three of them simply faced each other in tense silence. A faint breeze carried a few petals from farther off. "Now the situation is clear," Scott said with a smile. "That's a good thing." A two-way fight turning into a three-way standoff worked to Scott's advantage. His four summoned beasts guarded the four directions, and Savannah provided remote support. But he did not underestimate Salazar or Medea for a second. "So what now?" Salazar asked, calm and leisurely. Medea stepped back. "Forget it. I can't get any more." "Goodbye, Scott," she said. "Goodbye, Father," she added. Salazar suddenly extended his right hand. "Don't be so quick." Medea froze. Black smoke rose from the wound in her chest and from Salazar's palm, and the tendrils met and wove into a pitch-black chain. "Father?" she whispered, bewildered. A deceptively benign smile crossed Salazar's youthful face. "I am your father," he said, as if stating a fact, but there was a possessive weight behind it, as if Medea were a puppet. Medea stared for a long moment, then bowed her head. "I understand," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. Even here, can Medea switch places with the ceramic doll outside Avalon and leave? Scott watched them with interest. "Mr. Slytherin, it seems you truly have control of Medea's soul." A laugh rose in his chest. This was the old tableau, the doting father and the obedient daughter. Medea trembled but did not answer. Salazar, unfazed by Scott's mockery, only observed. "This is a wizard's work," he said. "Wizards seek magic's power. There are no taboos." "I'm sure you only need to speak for yourself. Not all wizards," Scott shot back. Neither man wanted a philosophical debate. Salazar shrugged. "What are your plans?" he asked. Scott looked at the silver necklace still hanging on his chest and shook the little hourglass pendant. "Putting everything else aside, can you set the ritual up again? The crucial material, the power of fate deviation, is on me." Salazar strolled to Medea and pulled the bone wand from her hand. "Whether it's you or the necklace, I'll take them back," he said lightly, and a red light fired from the wand. Scott's form blurred. He dodged back to Savannah's side. "Is that wand made from your own bones?" Salazar asked Medea. "Yes," she answered at last. Her eyes were as cold and deep as an ancient well. "The core is my hair." Salazar weighed the wand and nodded. Then the battle resumed. Edgar and Horace rose with a cry of wind and fire. Gulzin burrowed and poisoned the water Siren raised, turning the waves a sickly green. "I need a little time," Scott whispered to Savannah and began to work at his wand, setting runes and preparing something. The summoned beasts pinned Salazar, but he shrugged them off. Using King Arthur's body gave him strength and combat skill. It moved with the practiced ease of a seasoned warrior. Magic and martial prowess combined, and even 4 summoned beasts found it hard to restrain him. Savannah moved next, summoning endless thorny vines and turning the battlefield into a bristling forest. These weren't ordinary vines, but the moon vines from Apple Island. She tilted her head back and released a long, hoarse wolf cry. The sky dimmed, day turned to night. A bright moon rose, and the thorn forest woke like a horde. Under Savannah's control, the vines twisted into frenzied, bestial shapes. Then a wall of black flame erupted, blacker and fiercer than ordinary fire, blasting up from the thorn forest center. "I can't hold him for long," Savannah warned. Scott's spear had already taken shape before him. This was no ordinary Gungnir. A golden spear wrapped in pale primordial runes, its form branching like a gnarled twig. Scott adjusted the runes with sweat on his brow. The black fire surged outward and consumed the moon vines. Beasts were born and then torn apart by the infernal blaze. Sirain and Gulzin vanished into the flame. Sirain hit the ground in front of Scott, a ruined mass of transfigured materials. Gulzin followed in the same fate. Edgar and Horace dove, only to be met by a casual flick of Salazar's wand. Their attacks were deflected, and then they began to fall. Salazar hardly bothered as he walked through the black flames toward Scott and Savannah. The two beasts crashed into the earth and were broken to rubble where they fell. Savannah braced herself in front of Scott, staff planted. "I'll hold him," she said. "The Dohertys and Slytherin go back 1,000 years." Salazar paused and smiled. "Doherty? The Druid family? I killed many of your kind when I entered Avalon. I even slew a high druid priest. A young girl like you, enhanced by borrowed power, is no match for me. Whether I'm worthy or not, you'll find out soon, Savannah snapped. Scott reached out and pulled Savannah back. He lifted the spear, now clearly a shining, branching Gungnir, took it in hand, aimed, and prepared to throw. Salazar eyed it with mild amusement. Gungnir, he said. Odin's spear? An unavoidable divine weapon? He sounded skeptical, too self-assured to fear it. Then let's test that, Scott replied with a satisfied smile. Salazar barely raised his wand, eager to watch the outcome. Scott stepped forward and hurled the spear. It streaked like a golden comet, and in a blink was in front of Salazar. Time stretched. Scott saw Salazar's eyes widen. The man tried to retreat, to flicker defense after defense, but the spear seemed to pass through barrier after barrier like a ghost. Nothing could stop it, not even the black flame. The spear pursued relentlessly. Even when Salazar diverted and took the spear in the chest to avoid a blow to the head, he could not throw it off. Scott already had a second spear in his other hand, this one a purer Gungnir. He threw it instantly. This one struck bluntly, and Salazar could not evade. The spear pierced through the head. The black flames dwindled. Dark ochre leaked from the body where the spears had pinned it. From King Arthur's mouth and nose rose black smoke, coalescing into the phantom image of an old, bald man with a heavy beard. "So this is Salazar Slytherin," Scott said, looking up at the floating likeness with a small nod. The handsome youth's skin had been a disguise. The true face was ugly and aged. Scott glanced at the corpse pinned to the ground. He felt a small, sardonic ache. King Arthur had been used. If anyone deserved blame, it was Salazar Slytherin. I never expected such magic to exist. Salazar Slytherin looked down at Scott. Scott braced himself, every nerve alert. Even though Slytherin's scheme, centuries in the making, had just been shattered, the wizard showed almost no outward agitation. He was unnervingly calm. How could Scott not stay on guard? "Father?" Medea's voice, small and strained, floated up. She was looking at Slytherin's head, which hung in the air like a swirl of black mist. "Should we leave? Leave?" Slytherin shifted his gaze from Scott to Medea. "What do you think, my daughter?" Medea met his gaze without flinching. "Father, I think we still have time to adjust our plans." "You'd rearrange it?" Slytherin murmured, considering. Then, with a faint nod, he drifted down beside her. Savannah glared at Scott, unwilling to let them go. "Are we really going to let them walk away like this?" Scott smiled, shook his head. "I don't think Slytherin will go quietly." "I thought so too," Rowena Ravenclaw's portrait said. "Oh?" Slytherin laughed, soft, cold. His eyes swept past Ravenclaw's frame and fixed on Scott. "Why do you say that?" "Just a hunch," Scott answered. "My instincts tend to be right." As he spoke, the two long spears embedded in King Arthur's fallen body ripped free and flew back to Scott with deadly speed. Slytherin dissolved into a wisp of black mist and lunged for the corpse, but he was too late. The earth beneath Arthur split open like a maw and swallowed the body. Runes flared on the ground. A pillar of searing flame shot into the sky, and the heat warped the air for yards around. When the pillar faded, the ground was a web of glowing red fractures and charred earth. Black motes still drifted in the smoke. Slytherin's mist was unharmed by the heat, but the calm slipped from him. The mist recondensed into a ghostly head. His once pitch-black eyes were rimmed with red. "You destroyed that vessel," he said, a madness threading his voice. Scott, strangely, welcomed the crack in Slytherin's composure. He had always suspected the serpent's patience hid a darker hunger. "King Arthur has been dead for over 1,000 years, Scott said. "Let the legend stay a legend." "Very well." Slytherin's long beard, detached from any visible body, drifted upward. "A wizard from 1,000 years ago is best left as a story, then." "I honestly don't care about legends," Scott admitted. "So long as it doesn't involve me, I don't mind if you're resurrected." Slytherin had insisted on using Scott as part of a ritual. Therefore, the collision was inevitable. The mist seemed to regain its composure. His beard settled. His eyes returned to black. He appraised Scott slowly. "Some things are almost too coincidental," he said, brows knitting. "Your appearance, your uniqueness. Are you sure no one is pulling strings behind the scenes?" "Who knows?" Scott shrugged calmly. He knew more than he let on, but even if a mastermind existed, wasn't someone he could accuse lightly. Slytherin nodded. I've long suspected this world is more complicated than it seems. The comment snagged Scott's attention. What do you mean? Slytherin glanced at Ravenclaw's portrait. Rowena knows this too. Once a wizard reaches our level, they cannot truly advance. Scott blinked. He hadn't felt that limitation yet. Because you're still advancing? Slytherin's voice flattened. You can acquire more knowledge, more spells, more techniques, but you cannot fundamentally transcend. A wizard's power is capped, their magic use efficiency limited, and their lifespan finite, not like the old texts suggest. You mean the so-called gods? Scott asked. Gods are just stronger wizards, Slytherin said. Rowena's portrait interjected, sharp and warning. I told you, Scott, do not investigate the origin of wizards. Scott's heart tightened. He bowed toward the portrait. I understand, Mentor. Slytherin laughed aloud. How amusing. I never thought Rowena would become cowardly. He mocked Ravenclaw's portrait, relishing the memory of their early zeal. Rowena was once proud, brilliant, ravenous for knowledge. Enough, Salazar, Rowena sighed. That's the past. But the four of us came together because of ambition, Slytherin snapped. We founded Hogwarts to pass on what we knew. Yes, Rowena said quietly, and later 3 of us changed our minds. Only you refused to let go. You 3 betrayed me. Slytherin's tone chilled. We agreed to pass on our arts and our hopes. Then, you named the study of origins taboo. You made it forbidden to speak of. How could I pass despair to future generations? Because it was a dead end, Rowena replied. Why bequeath hopelessness? Dead end. The word set Scott's curiosity on fire. What horror lay in the origin of wizards? He forced the thought down. The portrait's warning had been explicit. Slytherin, seizing on his interest, spoke again, almost tenderly. You're curious, aren't you, kid? He offered it like an invitation. This is a question about whether a wizard can ever advance beyond us. Your mentor forbids you from pursuing it, but I invite you to uncover that truth with me. Scott met the head of black mist. I'm curious, yes, he said, keeping his voice steady, but I don't trust you. Cooperating with Slytherin was like asking a wolf to give up its fangs. The thought of being made a ritual component to resurrect some ancient wizard made him recoil. Slytherin's next words, however, went straight to the heart of temptation. I mean it, he said. You hold the power of fate deviation. You can destroy that, and the 1,000-mile eyes on you is already failing. I don't have another millennium to accumulate. He glanced at the crystal hourglass pendant at Scott's throat. Scott fell quiet. Who wouldn't want immortality? The idea had stirred a dark, familiar yearning in him, something that almost stole his resolve. Rowena was silent. She did not step in, did not restrain him. Savannah, uneasy, called, Scott? He blinked and forced himself to look outward to the wild, untamed sea of flowers beyond. That sight steadied him. Sorry, he turned back to Slytherin. I refuse. He'd seen the alternatives. Even Merlin had become a nightmare to cheat death. Who could be certain they could do better? Some mysteries were safer unanswered. He exhaled, feeling the weight lift. Slytherin watched him for a long moment, then sighed. What a pity. Scott was suddenly aware of how close he'd come to Slytherin's snare, how a few well-placed promises had almost unmoored him. Terrifying, he murmured. Such quiet manipulation. Truly Salazar Slytherin. My offer is sincere, Slytherin repeated, but your ambition is lacking. Scott smiled without offense. I've never been that ambitious. Otherwise the Sorting Hat would have put me in Gryffindor, not Ravenclaw. He chuckled. The Hat thought Hufflepuff would suit me too, but Ravenclaw fit better. Memories of when he first entered the magical world flickered through him, how he used to go with the flow. He no longer had that easy innocence. He straightened and raised his right hand. The 2 spears hovering before him obeyed, tips aligning, one aimed at Medea, the other at Slytherin. Let this end. Slytherin's expressionless mask did not change at the sight of the weapons, but Medea's composure cracked. Scott knew the mist-formed Slytherin would not be easily harmed by Gungnir. The dark head drifted toward Medea and slipped into her like smoke sinking into a shell. Medea cried out, clutching herself. Pain contorted her face. Scott's hand descended. The branch-shaped long spear flashed through her chest with a sharp, crystalline sound. Her body split along fine seams, fragments of porcelain collapsing into a heap on the stone. Where the spear passed, the air shimmered. The spear plunged into that ripple and vanished. They have to still be inside Avalon, Savannah said. Isn't spatial magic sealed there, except for this anomalous space? I thought Medea's trick, replacing her true body with a doll, was a soul link, Scott said. But that's not the case. He felt the lingering bond. The spear had been connected to him through Avalon, not the island in the lake, but within Apple Island's domain. How do we get out of here? Savannah asked, anxious. Someone new. A familiar figure flickered into existence for a heartbeat. Merlin. He pointed toward the White Tower, then was gone. What? Savannah peered at Scott. Who else is here? Let's go, Scott smiled, already turning for the tower. Bring Aaron. I understand. Savannah's vines that had bound Aaron twisted and became a massive wolf, hauling the blood-soaked boy along. Such a caring sister, Aaron whimpered miserably. I'm losing too much blood. If you say another word, I'll leave you, Savannah snapped without looking back. Aaron tried to bawl twice, then clamped a hand over his mouth and pretended to be brave. Scott and Savannah paid him no mind and walked into the White Tower. They ignored the 1,000-mile eyes on the first floor and took the spiraling stairs that hugged the inner wall. On the second floor sat a sealed black coffin, its surface covered in intricate, unreadable runes. The patterns ran across the floor as well. Scott spared no time to decipher them. He hurried past the coffin and pushed upward, eager for whatever lay beyond. Inside the White Tower, Scott and Savannah ran, stair after spiral stair. A giant wolf padded close behind Savannah, its back strung with vines that held Aaron captive. He moaned from the jolts, the sound half deliberate, half real. Neither of them paid him any attention. Each landing in the tower was lined with astonishing ritual sigils and shelves of glittering artifacts, but Scott had no time to examine them now. He skimmed past, committing what he could to memory, planning to come back later. They didn't stop until they reached the top floor. This level was different from the rest of the exterior. From the inside, it was almost entirely transparent, glass walls and a clear spire overhead. The floor was smooth white flagstone, and a hexagonal planter sat in the middle, overflowing with lush exotic blooms, herbs Savannah recognized at a glance, species extinct outside Avalon. Above the planter hovered a cluster of ancient bronze gears, simple and unadorned, turning slowly. The largest was at least 3 meters across, the smallest barely the length of an arm. In the center of the largest gear yawned a circular aperture, filled with a semi-transparent light curtain. Scott felt spatial turbulence in it. This is the exit, Savannah breathed. Scott nodded. He tucked away the Ravenclaw portrait, shifted into a peregrine falcon, and darted into the light. In a blink, he was standing on a small island at the center of a lake, apple trees rustling around him. Savannah and the giant wolf, with Aaron still bound, followed almost immediately. Where are they? Savannah asked. Can you sense them? I can still sense them. Don't rush. Space magic is forbidden in Avalon. Scott lowered his voice. That works both ways. Your space bending would fail here, and so would theirs. Savannah understood. Then we can't bring him with us. Aaron's eyes widened. He regarded them with sharp suspicion. What are you going to do? Leave me? Sleep, Scott said, smiling too casually. He jabbed his wand and cast Stupefy. Savannah winced. Druids resist Stupefy, she said. Scott produced a vial of life-and-death water, tipped it into Aaron's mouth, and tossed the bottle aside. Aaron's struggles slackened. Scott studied his wounds. Heal him if you don't want him to die, he told Savannah. Savannah hesitated, then sighed and laid a rough healing charm over the druid's injuries. She hauled Aaron down from the wolf's back, glancing at him one last time before mounting the beast. Let's go. She took Scott's outstretched hand. Scott was watching the horizon. They've sped up, he said. They're already near the thorn forest at Apple Island's edge. If they try to leave Avalon. The exit is on the northern border. Savannah glanced at the sun. We'll have to take to the sky. Scott felt the weight of the choice. Gungnir, when linked with Yggdrasil, locked onto targets by soul aura. When Slytherin escaped, he seemed to be invading Medea's soul. If he completed that invasion, he could alter his soul signature, and Scott's magic might lose its lock. If they missed this chance now, they might never catch him. Scott did not want an enemy hiding in shadow. Then we go now. Savannah looked him in the eye. I'm coming. She jumped down and mounted the wolf. Scott waved his wand at the beast. The vines hardened into silver-white alloy, and the wolf's shape reformed. Complex magical runes crawled over its new surface. Scott pulled a magic-infused gem from his bag and flung it at the creature. Light flared. When it faded, a majestic hippogriff stood where the wolf had been. Scott swung into the saddle and hauled Savannah up beside him. The hippogriff pawed the air, stretched its wings, and launched skyward. As they climbed, a pressure folded over Scott's mind, not physical, but a crushing mental oppression that made thinking feel like a labor. He remembered how crows had dropped when he tested earlier. He tightened his occlumency and raised his wand. "Protego," he shouted. "Expecto Patronum." An invisible barrier wrapped them and the beast. A silver, moon-like glow erupted, and Scott's peregrine Patronus leapt out, circling them. The crushing weight eased. Savannah began a rolling chant. Green light spilled from her staff. Thousands of white petals scattered, vines snaked through them, and two thorned floral crowns wove themselves onto their heads. The oppressive force cut in half the instant the crowns rested there. Scott grinned, gave a thumbs up, then clicked his fingers. The magical barrier snapped and dissolved. "Hold on," he said. The hippogriff beat its wings, forming a hurricane that carved a calm bubble of wind around them and propelled them forward. The Patronus streamed beside them like a silver river. Above, the previously clear sky had darkened. Layers of heavy clouds massed and dropped lower, rumbling, crackling with forked lightning that writhed like serpents. The oppressive presence intensified. The hippogriff's wings slowed for a moment. "It's awake," Savannah cried. Black storm clouds loomed and then opened up. Rain fell, but the hippogriff's hurricane sheared the drops into ribbons that spun aside, leaving them dry. Lightning hissed through the air. A bolt struck toward them, and the hippogriff twisted aside with a frantic neigh. The flash was blinding. More lightning followed, producing an inverted forest of electric spears. Trees caught fire and were then drowned by thunderous rain, smoke curling up. "Closer," Scott urged. They skidded through the storm, the hippogriff dodging death by inches. Ahead, beyond a strip of grass, the thorn forest waited, thorns writhing like a living curtain. Within its heart, a circle of black flame burned in defiance of the rain, a wall of fire sealing off a ring of scorched earth. Inside, more than a dozen Medeas fought with everything they had, resisting the relentless probing of Gungnir. One stood at the center with her eyes shut, black mist crawling about her. The others supplied her with ceramic puppets, which shattered under attack and were rebuilt from the mud and ash. A thick carpet of white ceramic shards lay underfoot. Scott hovered and watched. He sent Gungnir at the central figure. The golden spear formed and lanced toward the closed-eyed Medea. The spear drew clean through, but at the last instant the target shifted. A nearby puppet had swapped places with her. From the ground beneath them, a brilliant green flash erupted, Avada Kedavra, while twin bolts of lightning ripped from the clouds above, closing their escape. Scott cursed and shrank into a peregrine falcon to dodge the crossfire. Savannah shifted into an eagle. There was no time for the hippogriff to shrink. It bore the brunt of the attack. The lightning and the killing curse struck it home. The great beast plunged into the black flames, bellowed, then melted away. Scott and Savannah dove down, landed amid thorns outside the ring, and reverted to human forms, separated from the scene within the fire by a barricade of flame and thorn. They could not see clearly. "It changed," Savannah said, striking her staff into the ground. Green motes drifted over the moon vines, quieting them. "It has indeed changed." When the black flames parted for a moment, they saw the wreckage. Of the dozen Medeas, only two remained. One looked at them with eerie calm. The other lay impaled, two spears crossed through her chest. Scott's stomach tightened. He understood what had happened. Slytherin had possessed Medea, taken over her body and soul, and then split part of her soul off as bait to draw Gungnir. Because Slytherin had inhabited and then departed Medea's body, the Gungnir Scott had fired had been tracking Medea's soul aura. It had been tricked. "You are more heartless than I imagined, Mr. Slytherin," Scott said, his voice low and tangled with something like regret and anger. The storm still roared. Lightning flared constantly, and in the shifting light the two faces, one calm, one broken, looked grotesquely unreal. The worst part was the knowledge that their quarry could be hiding behind a borrowed soul, changing how every lock and spear and tracking spell would find him next. 568. Fire of Sin Quetzalcoatl Snap. With several peals of thunder, Medea's body, pierced by the long spear, shattered and fell. A faint wisp of spirit drifted up from the fragments. "Come, my daughter." Slytherin, inhabiting Medea's husk, reached out. "Come here. Don't worry. I will revive you." Medea, now only a pale, dazed wisp, floated before him. Slytherin curled his 5 fingers, and the translucent soul contracted instantly into a small white orb with a trailing tail, which he tucked away casually. Scott watched without intervening. "So you left her a way out," he said with a half-smile, then waved his hand, and the 2 long spears returned to hover before him. "She is your daughter, after all." Black mist surged from Slytherin again. Also because she made a Horcrux before she died. When the haze cleared, his appearance had altered. He looked like a young man with black hair and eyes, his dark green robes now a black cloak. Scott studied the change and felt certain this was the same technique Medea had used against Lord Voldemort's soul. Slytherin could not perform the full resurrection. He'd settled for the next best thing, sacrificing his blood daughter. That she hadn't completely vanished was likely due to the Horcrux. Compared to Voldemort, separated by unknown generations, Medea's blood tie to Slytherin was far closer. She was his daughter. In that state, can she still be saved? Scott asked. Rain thickened. He raised a hand to brush water from his face and pulled up his hood. Slytherin let the black flames burning around him pool and gather like living things. "Are you very concerned about her?" he asked with a smile. "Just curious," Scott answered. What he really wanted to know was the extent of Slytherin's soul research. If he could restore Medea after such damage, his work on souls would be terrifying. "You reveal your greed," Slytherin said. "But it's natural. Rowena was as greedy for knowledge as you." The black flames converged into a monstrous form, a giant winged serpent. Its scales were matte pitch black, its wings rimmed with black feathers. It reared, a fleshy black crest trembling on its head, and spread vast wings that blotted out the sky. Lightning hit its head from the clouds, but did no visible harm. The serpent hissed. The sound, shrill and grating, like nails on a blackboard, made Scott physically uneasy. A few petals crumpled and fell. He felt the thorn crown on his head wither. For an instant, his forehead pounded, and his thoughts blurred. Savannah beside him staggered, nearly collapsing. The moon vines that made up the surrounding thorn forest rippled and toppled in a great wave. Slytherin seized the moment. From the bone wand in his hand, a green bolt leapt out. "Avada Kedavra! Caw!" Lambo appeared in a flash, its body swelling as it spread its wings and intercepted the curse in front of the 2 of them. The impact knocked Lambo back, and Scott and Savannah were thrown with it. Scott activated Gungnir as he was shoved. The 2 long spears that had hovered before him trembled, then launched, one streaking toward Slytherin, the other at the giant, feathered serpent. Slytherin's form dissolved into black mist and retreated at impossible speed, merging into the serpent's body. The 2 spears pierced the serpent's head and neck, but the wounds snapped shut as the pierced areas burst into black flame and healed almost instantly. Scott, back on his feet, frowned. "Are you 2 okay?" Lambo folded down and settled on Scott's shoulder. "We're fine." Scott looked up at the enormous serpent. Savannah said with disgust, "I think I understand. Those black flames are fires of sin, summoned using souls as fuel." "Not his own soul," Scott said coldly. "The people he killed." "Exactly. He's burned countless lives to fuel this." Savannah's observation was sharp. Slytherin's voice came from the serpent's body. "There's no harm in telling you." The serpent lowered its massive head, cold eyes fixed on Scott and Savannah. "Unless you can purge this virtually infinite soul power all at once, you cannot harm me." Savannah glanced at the spears floating before Scott. "Even Gungnir can't deal enough damage. And we can't get close," she added, raising her long wooden staff. She cast soul protection wards over both of them, and the thorn crown reformed on their heads. "This burns souls." "This is difficult," Scott admitted. "I don't have many tools against souls. That's a weakness of mine." Gungnir could wound souls, but the serpent's size made the effect negligible. Slytherin had merged into the flames. Scott couldn't pinpoint him precisely for a true strike. In this state, Slytherin was harder to fight than when he'd occupied King Arthur's body. The serpent hissed again and unleashed another piercing shriek. Scott frowned but was ready. The peregrine falcon Patronus that had been trailing them swooped overhead and poured silvery light down. Under that glow, the thorn crowns did not wither from the cry. Still, the next moment the serpent spat a black stream of fire. Scott seized Savannah's hand, and they vanished from their spot in an instant, reappearing in a distant patch of thorn forest. Lambo, who had slipped away earlier and arrived quietly, used contract magic to summon Scott. Through gaps in the thorns, Scott glimpsed the serpent's vast body, occupying half the sky. "I'll leave here first," Lambo announced of its own accord, flapping away. "What do we do?" Savannah asked, anxious. "Sorry, my magic can't do much here," she admitted. Scott looked up at the looming serpent. "If it feeds on souls, let's give it something without a soul to burn." He knelt, slamming his wand into the mud with a backhand. Magic flowed, runes shimmered, the earth churned, and gigantic shapes rose out of the ground. Ice giants, identical to Ymir, emerged one after another. Finally, Scott activated the ring on his left index finger and summoned the true Ymir himself. 10 ice giants stood high on the fallen moon vines, surrounding the feathered serpent with bodies as huge as its own. "Since we can't destroy those soul fuels all at once, we'll wage a war of attrition," Scott said softly. "Do you believe his claim?" "Which one?" Savannah asked. "That the soul power he controls is nearly infinite." Savannah shook her head firmly. "Impossible. Even if he killed endlessly, his reserves would run out eventually." "So do I," Scott nodded. The ice giants breathed bitter blue cold, conjuring a world of ice and snow. They advanced with weapons and shields of ice to surround the feathered serpent. Soul attacks were useless against alchemical constructs and transfiguration-made bodies. The serpent's infernal heat was met and offset by the giant's cold. The giant's blows forced the serpent to expend soul fuel to regenerate and create more black flame. "Now it's our move," Scott told Savannah with a smile. "To get out from under pressure, Slytherin has to leave the serpent and use other means to break the ice giants. And the moment he leaves the serpent," Savannah added, "Gungnir can land a precise strike." Exactly. Scott had left Gungnir where Lambo had summoned him earlier. Though distant, he could still control it remotely. The moment Slytherin abandoned the nearly untargetable form, Scott could strike true. As the ice giants tightened the siege, the serpent's struggles grew weaker. An ice giant's axe severed one of its wings with a flash of cold light. The serpent opened its mouth in a howl that became a visible storm, blasting the giants right around it. Even from afar, Scott and Savannah felt the force. Their thorn crowns withered, and both clutched their ears. When the sound died, they realized they'd both been bleeding from the nose. Bathed in fire, the black-feathered serpent regrew its wings and launched itself into the low black clouds. "It's escaping," Savannah said, wiping away her nosebleed and using magic to heal them both. "That's not necessarily good." Scott's face hardened as he watched the convulsing, thunderous clouds. "There's something up there." Slytherin had sensed it too. The serpent did not climb high but hovered, neck twisting as its eyes swept the ground searching for Scott and Savannah. Savannah had been casting a healing spell. Though she cut it off the moment the serpent lifted its gaze, the green spark of magic had given them away. Slytherin saw the fading glow and dove toward them. The ice giants hurled their ice weapons at the diving beast. It ignored the impacts and spewed a sea of black fire below. "It's time to go." Scott grabbed Savannah's hand. Lambo's summon appeared in time. As the black sea descended, they vanished again, appearing in a farther, still-standing thicket of thorns. The ice giants kept pushing forward, channeling blasts of cold air to carve glacier paths through the inferno and attempting to encircle the serpent. Slytherin would not be trapped again. Before the ring closed, the serpent beat its wings and lifted skyward. Without Savannah's direction, Slytherin relied on his perception to hunt for them, and the serpent began to patrol. Below, the ice giants changed tactics, condensing ice javelins and throwing them in endless salvos. Lightning crackled from the clouds. The serpent, being made of black flame, didn't flinch from lightning and moved through it as if causing a storm to trail it. "The clouds are coming down." "No," Savannah whispered, voice trembling. Scott stared up at the heavy black ceiling. A deep unease rose in him. Savannah felt it too. "It's coming out." Slytherin felt the threat from above. The feathered serpent stopped patrolling and dove at breakneck speed. The black clouds churned violently. Then, with a sound like the world ripping, an enormous, hideous head burst through the storm and pierced the sky, golden eyes lowering to stare down. 569. Red dragon occupies the sky. Scott stared stunned as a head suddenly pushed through the clouds, a dragon's head, entirely scarlet. Even though only its head showed, it blotted out half the sky. Slytherin's black feathered serpent and Scott's ice giants were huge, but beside that red dragon they seemed insignificant. The dragon's golden eyes swept the ground like searchlights, warm-toned pupils that nevertheless felt icy and merciless. Scott and Savannah crouched in the thorny jungle. The ice giants had frozen in place, all eyes turned upward. Only the feathered serpent was diving. Roar! The dragon stretched its neck and inevitably snapped at the falling serpent. Scott noticed heavy golden chains wrapped around its throat. The rain had stopped. Boom! Black flames burst forth. The feathered serpent in the dragon's jaws turned into a writhing inferno of jet-black fire. The red dragon tossed its head, spitting the serpent out along with the black blaze. The feathered serpent hit the thorns, rolled, and the black flames reduced the surrounding moonvines to ash. Then, as if the flames had simply reassembled it, the serpent reformed whole and unhurt. "Is it my imagination?" Scott breathed. The feathered serpent looked smaller. Savannah answered, "Not your imagination. It did shrink." Roar! The dragon reared and unleashed a deafening roar. Sound and shockwaves radiated outward, flattening every moon vine in the thorn forest and rocking the ice giants and the serpent until they could barely stand. Scott and Savannah pressed themselves down, hands over their ears, eyes stinging. The dragon was immense, big enough to cover the sky, but it was chained above Avalon. It couldn't stoop and strike the ground. Knowing that, Scott's heart slowed. If it couldn't reach them, they didn't have to deal with it right now. Under Scott's control, the ice giants received fresh orders. The moment the roar subsided, they closed in on Slytherin's feathered serpent. The serpent shrieked, unable to flee upward while the red dragon watched, so it fled low toward the swamp at the jungle's edge. The ice giants hunted like a coordinated pack, hurling spears at the wings to clip its speed. Roar! Another titanic roar shook the earth. The ice giants and the serpent were abruptly frozen, teetering from the blast. Scott looked up. Golden flames seemed to burn in the dragon's eyes. White smoke poured from its nostrils and turned into cloud, and then it opened its maw and breathed a sheet of golden dragon breath. The sky was swallowed by brilliant gold. Heat rolled across the land. Scott grabbed Savannah's hand. The runic circuit beneath their feet flared and pulled the shimmering barrier down into the earth. The two of them and the barrier sank into the ground as torrid heat pressed down like a midsummer sauna. They fled deeper into the earth until the black of the barrier swallowed them. From inside, Scott could see through the barrier faint streaks of flowing lava like veins. "This is terrifying," Savannah whispered, palms on her chest. Scott felt emptied for a moment. Dragons of the normal magic world were mere fire lizards compared to this. "I don't know anything more than vague legends," Savannah said, still shaken. When the heat at last ebbed, Scott cut the runic circuit. He called for Lambo, but there was no answer. A cold thought settled over him. Lambo must have been caught in the dragon breath. He had made Lambo by Transfiguration, but their long companionship had blurred the line between creation and friend. Lambo wasn't a simple combat summon like Scott's other creatures. He had become a pet, a companion. Even if Scott transfigured a new raven and loaded Lambo's memories into it, it wouldn't be the same. That's why he'd never upgraded Lambo when he enhanced the other four summoned beasts. He'd only altered their magic contract so they could call one another. Now, perhaps, that compromise had cost him Lambo. "Scott," Savannah touched his wrist. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'll be fine." He forced himself up. He had no time to grieve yet. Savannah held a glowing green seedling between her palms. "This will keep air in the cave," she said. "Let's get to the surface and see," Scott decided. He raised his wand, and the surrounding soil and rock twisted and reshaped. A giant Komodo-like lizard's head of stone formed from the earth, opened its jaws, and swallowed the spherical barrier containing Scott and Savannah. Inside the construct, Scott sat cross-legged and produced his magic mirror. He tapped it, and the mirror showed what the Komodo lizard's eyes were seeing. The lizard tunneled through the ground, dodging rivers of fresh, red-hot lava, and surfaced into a landscape turned to ash. The once lush thorn forest was gone. Black, scorched earth stretched in every direction, red lava braided into dozens of rivulets. The red and black vista looked like hell. "Just one strike," Savannah said, trembling. "Even Gungnir was destroyed by that dragon breath," Scott replied gravely. The Komodo lizard looked up at the sky. The red dragon still loomed, its golden eyes fixed and cold. It had noticed the lizard, but did not breathe again. The stone monster availed itself instead of scanning for Slytherin. "Ymir?" Savannah murmured. "Ymir will be fine," Scott said, glancing at the ring on his left index finger, still intact. "If something's irresistible, it can return on its own and wait to be summoned again." Savannah nodded, and Scott studied the mirror. Black soil condensed nearby and formed a crude, glossy, entirely black ceramic doll. It twitched, then smoothed into a flawless human shape. Slytherin looked up at the red dragon, assessed the Komodo lizard, and walked toward it. Scott let the lizard remain still. Slytherin stopped a dozen paces away. Scott sent his voice through the lizard. "Looks like we've run into a serious problem." Slytherin glanced at the dragon. "It seems my fire of sin cannot stand against that golden dragon breath." "My evil fire was purified by the red dragon's golden flame," he added without argument. "You've never seen that red dragon before?" Scott asked. "No." Slytherin shook his head. "I used to fly the skies. I felt the oppressive force, but I never awakened this thing." "You tried to find the source of that force?" Scott pressed. He suspected Slytherin had investigated. "Of course I tried," Slytherin said, "but I can't fly high. The higher I go, the stronger the pressure." "Roar." The red dragon roared again, displeased. Cracks spidered across the ceramic figure's surface. Fragments dropped to the ground. The Komodo lizard sank back into the earth on Scott's command. "Slytherin's real body is hidden somewhere," Savannah observed. Scott had thought the same. He'd searched repeatedly with his magical senses, but had found nothing. "Let's not surface for now," he decided aloud. He had the Komodo lizard move through the ground so they could search for Slytherin's true body more easily. "That's fine," Savannah said. She wasn't keen on facing that chained dragon either. "Good thing it's restrained," she added. "If it were free, we'd be done for." Scott agreed. He still couldn't fathom any way to fight something of that scale. He asked Savannah, "Do you think that red dragon is actually alive?" Savannah hesitated, then shook her head as if embarrassed at the thought. "No, it felt wrong to me too, but I couldn't place it because the pressure was so overwhelming." "What do you mean?" "It's like thunder and lightning, like a storm, like the land itself," she said slowly. "This is Avalon. The natural phenomena here don't follow the rules outside." Scott's mind clicked into place. "You mean the red dragon is a kind of dungeon mechanism, a natural phenomenon of Avalon, the giant secret realm?" Savannah nodded. "A natural phenomenon." They let the Komodo lizard tunnel on, sometimes dipping, sometimes rising, while Scott stretched his magical perception to its limit. Still, he found no trace of Slytherin's true body. At last, he made a decision. "We'll head north as fast as possible to the passage that leads back out of Avalon. We'll wait there. If Slytherin intended to leave, he would try to exit that way. They could guard the passage and force him to come." Savannah agreed and used her druid spells to mark the path. With a clear direction, the Komodo lizard stopped wandering and sped straight ahead. After a while, Scott felt the nagging sensation they had forgotten something. "We seem to have forgotten something," he said. Savannah frowned, thinking. Then Scott looked at her and remembered. "Aaron, we left Aaron behind." Savannah's face registered sudden alarm. Then she waved her hand. "It's fine. He'll wake up when the potion wears off. There are tons of apple trees on that island in the middle of the lake. He won't starve." Scott had no stomach to argue. If it weren't for Savannah, he might have taken care of Aaron himself earlier. Still, she was uneasy. "I just hope he doesn't do anything stupid when he wakes." Scott did not reply. He had seen enough of Aaron to know that peace was not likely to be his first instinct. This is a placeholder. Attempting to fetch the chapter from utcarb-com.com /The Wind and the Eagle Wings at Hogwarts, Chapter 7 failed with the following error. Error. Attempt to load the address utcarb.com API reader/get resulted in a network error. Failed to fetch. Caw. Caw! Edgar beat its fiery red wings, darting through the flames. The pillars of fire that swirled around Scott trembled as if about to collapse inward. Scott flicked his wand. A black spear materialized beside him and flashed, piercing Edgar's chest. The spear's momentum carried the massive bird into the dense cluster of evil spirits above, and then it detonated. Water from the spear met Edgar's inner fire, and they repelled one another, producing a terrifying blast. Black and red energies spiraled outward with a deafening roar, then dispersed. Wherever the explosion struck, the wailing spirits dissolved into thin wisps of smoke. When the light died, a large patch of sky that had been choked with malice was suddenly cleared. Scott let out a short breath of relief. At least some of the evil spirits could be banished. But the respite didn't last long. Several ice giants closed in, blasting ice-cold air at the dying flames and thrusting long, ice-forged weapons into the emptied cores of the fire pillars. The flames faltered and died. The frozen glaives, each larger than Scott's body, swept through where the fire had been, their points coming perilously close. Horus hovered above the extinguished columns and unleashed a volley of razor winds like machine gun fire into the center of the space. Even more evil spirits poured through the gaps the cold had created, shrieking as they lunged with fangs and claws. Pertigo! Scott slammed his arm up, and a magic shield sprang into being. Ice spears, wind blades, and spirits struck it almost simultaneously, clanging and scraping against the surface. Cracks spidered across the transparent barrier like glass struck by countless pebbles. His wand swiped magic as he fought to mend it, straining to sustain the continuous onslaught. "Is that all you've got?" Slytherin's voice sneered, leaking informally from the mouths of the spirits. "Can't even use your own tools properly? Rowena's portrait never taught you how to fight. Your method is hopelessly flawed." With all the flames gone, 3 summoned beasts, 9 ice giants and countless spirits ringed Scott's shield and kept hammering it. Slytherin's taunts kept coming. "Pure defense only eats your magic," he said. "What good is that other than to drain you?" Outside the barrier, the spirits coalesced into a pitch-black cloud of countless grotesque faces. In a single, coordinated motion, they opened enormous maws and began to gnaw at the shield. Scott poured more power into the ward. The drain climbed sharply, several times what it had been before. "Of course it has a purpose." He smiled, and then he was gone from the spot. Under the sprawling golden oak, Savannah stood on the grass gripping a long wooden staff. A translucent sphere hovered before her, showing the alternate dimension's interior like a living window. Scott's figure had appeared beside her, as if he had stepped through the gap between spaces. "At least it drew all of them together," he murmured, and snapped his fingers. Inside the alternate dimension, every transfiguration construct and every Gungnir spear detonated at once. Scott and Savannah could not hear the blast. They only saw it through the phantom. Light and shadow braided together, energies intertwined, and colors merged until everything fused into a single, blinding white. The white flooded the alternate world, sky and ground alike, so intensely that the sphere hanging before them glowed like an enormous incandescent lamp, outshining even the oak's warm golden light. A furious roar split the air. Perhaps the red dragon had been roused by the sudden surge of light. The oak's vast canopy rose like an umbrella and almost silently muffled the sound. Beneath its protection, even the wildflowers at Scott's feet stood unfazed. Outside the oak's shelter, whole stretches of forest lay toppled, and countless beasts were dead where they lay. When the glare faded, the sphere cleared. The alternate dimension had been reduced to a barren wasteland, the land overturned and stripped bare. No spirits remained. No summoned beasts. No ice giants. Slytherin was gone. Is Slytherin gone? Savannah stepped forward, concern and hope warring in her voice. Unclear. Scott moved beside her, studying the scene carefully. "Let's wait a little." "All right," Savannah nodded. "I didn't expect you to have a trick like that. I thought you were in a lot of danger." "Experience teaches you to always have a trick up your sleeve." He crouched and dug his hand into the grass. A palm-sized chameleon crawled up and settled in his palm. "Is this the trick you kept?" Savannah's surprise showed in the lift of her brows. "Contract summoning," Scott said, standing, "and the self-destruction of those transfiguration constructs." He stroked the little lizard. The transfigured constructs were quick to make, but they were complicated. Layers of runic circuits that behaved like unstable explosives. If the circuit wasn't perfectly stable, the construct could and would self-destruct. With a few deliberate tweaks, the destruction could be maximized. Failures in experiments often still taught useful lessons. Just their self-destruction wouldn't have been enough, Savannah said. There were the Gungnires too, Scott replied. In short, the spirits Slytherin controlled have been cleared. Even if he is still alive, his power should be seriously diminished. Really? Savannah hesitated. She didn't fully trust Slytherin's fate. He said it himself, Scott admitted. You shouldn't take his words at face value. Savannah kept her doubt thinly veiled. Scott didn't argue. He watched the empty alternate realm and then smiled faintly. It doesn't matter. I'm not going back in. I won't open it again. I'll seal it. If Slytherin had been destroyed or merely driven dormant, either way he would be trapped inside that sealed pocket forever. Good idea. Savannah agreed. I can seal it in the Holy Tree. With its magical circulation, the alternate dimension would be preserved instead of collapsing. Scott dug into the soil and brought up a gleaming white gem. He picked it up and turned it over in his hand. This gem holds the alternate dimension. Without a constant infusion of power, it can only last 7 days. And if Slytherin works from within, it could be shorter. After we leave, I can bind it to the Holy Tree, Savannah said, eager. Scott toyed with the gem and offered, half joking, what do you think would happen if I sent him into space? Space? Savannah blinked. Is that necessary? That's the safest place, he said with a laugh. No need, a new voice said. Savannah and Scott looked up together. Perched on an oak branch was a handsome young man with white hair and a white robe, a long wand at his side. He smiled at them. Who are you? Savannah asked, raising her staff. Don't be afraid. The newcomer hopped down and floated before them. When Savannah lashed out, green vines burst from the ground, but they passed through him harmlessly. Some kind of ghost? Savannah took a step back. No. The figure drifted through the vines and flew up to Scott's face. Aren't you going to tell this young lady? He peered at Scott. You're a mischievous child, Scott. This is Merlin? Savannah's staff lowered a fraction as she processed the name. Scott introduced him without any inflection. This is Merlin, the greatest wizard Britain has ever known. Merlin smiled and waved at Savannah. Hello, I'm Merlin. Merlin? Savannah's voice lodged between astonishment and disbelief. Impossible. Why impossible? Merlin tilted his head, wand tucked into his sleeve. Savannah remembered how her ancestors had described Merlin, an ancient, bearded sorcerer with a craggy face. She looked him over, disbelieving. With a little laugh, Merlin shifted. His face wrinkled, his beard lengthened. The old Merlin materialized for a heartbeat. Savannah stumbled back a step. Scott put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. He really is Merlin, he said. For a moment, hope flared in Savannah's eyes, and then dimmed. Cough. Scott steered the conversation back to the matter at hand. What did you mean earlier by no need? Merlin's finger flicked toward the gem in Scott's hand, then toward the sky. Give this gem to it. It? Scott asked, puzzled. You mean the red dragon? Merlin nodded, young and handsome again, smile narrow-eyed. Yes, if you trust me, do it. Scott hesitated, turning the gem in his palm. The oak's canopy blocked the sky, but he imagined the dragon high above. Merlin didn't press, he simply floated there, waiting. Scott, Savannah reached for his arm, steadier now. Are you really Merlin? She asked him directly. Merlin answered matter-of-factly, I haven't always been in Avalon, and I am not in Avalon right now. Savannah blinked, confused by his phrasing. Merlin continued, the fairies, Morgan and the others, they grew old and died. So fairies can age too, Savannah murmured. Merlin laughed softly. People call them fairies out of respect. In truth, they were just very powerful witches. And you? Savannah pressed. Why are you still here? Merlin's existence is peculiar, Scott said, giving her a gentle squeeze on the shoulder. He can only exist in dreams. At this moment, he isn't in Avalon proper, but within a dream woven by our collective consciousness. Merlin clapped his hands once. Decide, Scott. Scott looked into the gem, then at Merlin. I've decided. I'll trust you and give it to the red dragon. Merlin's smile widened. You must deliver it yourself. Fly up and hand the gem to the red dragon at close range. No, Savannah cried. You'll be killed. Merlin said nothing, only looked at Scott and waited. Scott met Merlin's gaze for a long second. Then he stepped out from beneath the oak's branches, loosening Savannah's grip as he moved. "I'll go," he said. 572. What would you choose? "Scott!" Savannah called again. He turned, smiled, and gave her a quick nod. "Don't worry." "Then be careful," she answered. He stepped out from under the oaks and looked up. The red dragon met his gaze. Its golden eyes narrowed. Its neck, bound in heavy golden chains, stretched toward him. For a long moment the dragon simply regarded him, and then it roared. Visible waves of sound and an all-consuming storm poured from its open maw. Scott felt a harmless gust of wind before the violence arrived. He squinted into the wind, his black curls whipped loose, his cloak snapping like a flag. He raised his wand, a short ebony rod, and it flared like a beacon in the mist. Where the wand's light touched, the dragon's destructive sound and storm changed. The tornado that could have shredded a forest softened into a gentle breeze. The deafening sound waves turned into a soaring melody. Surrounded by that calm wind and the strange music, Scott began to rise. Merlin appeared at his side, light as a leaf, drifting on the same breeze. Scott knew this Merlin wasn't truly in the physical world, just a projection from his own mind. Still, Merlin applauded, smiling. "Congratulations on breaking your shackles. Only one who can transfigure all things can be called a perfect transfigurationist." Scott nodded. "The storm and the sound were conjured by magic." "Then you've taken the first step," Merlin said. The red dragon roared again. Scott held his wand and poured transfiguration into the air around him, turning the storm into a gentle current and the lethal sound into music until the assault finally faded. He hovered, cloak fluttering, and stared up at the dragon. White smoke drifted from its nostrils. The beast was preparing dragon breath. Scott flicked his wand. Air condensed into a gigantic, transparent raven at his feet. It cawed once and became solid beneath him. Merlin clapped. Scott slid on his sunglasses and braced himself as the dragon opened its mouth. Rivers of golden dragon flame erupted, blinding and scorching, like multiple suns blazing at once. Scott rode the raven straight into the fire. The heat threatened to incinerate him even without direct contact, but he did not stop. He pushed the wand's light harder. This time it burned white, nearly matching the dragon's gold. Gold and white met and slid past each other. The flame continued downward, and Scott continued upward. He emerged with singed edges to his cloak and burnt patches in his hair, panting but smiling. "Brilliant," Merlin applauded. "You transfigured the dragon flame, which pulsed with chaotic magic." "I didn't think I could either," Scott admitted, settling onto the raven's back and glancing up at the panting dragon. "You rarely take life-threatening risks," Merlin observed. Scott shrugged. "There's nothing wrong with steady progress." Merlin only smiled and said no more. The dragon quieted after that, and the raven slowly bore Scott closer. As he approached, the beast's scale size became unimaginable, a single scale larger than Scott's whole body. He had the raven stop 1,000 meters away, already perilously close. The dragon could swallow him if it stretched its neck. Scott retrieved the gem that housed the alternate dimension and tossed it up. He couldn't have hurled it so far by strength alone. With a small motion of his wand, the gem accelerated and floated before the dragon's right eye. The white stone was tiny against that vast face, but the dragon saw it. The gem shimmered, and the dragon's body began to go transparent. The black clouds overhead thinned. Scott took off his sunglasses. As the veil cleared, he could just make out the dragon's full form. A sky-sized body, wings spanning like an endless canopy, pinned to the colorless firmament by thick golden pillars, its neck, limbs, and torso bound in countless chains that vanished into the distant corners of the sky. For a chilling second, Scott forgot to breathe. "This," Merlin said softly, "is the masterpiece of Morgan and 9 other Fae. It's nearly broken free." "Nearly?" Scott echoed. Merlin put a finger to his lips. "Watch." The dragon's form dissolved into a flow of red light that slipped free of the chains. The gem in front of its eye flared, and the red light poured into it like storm clouds into a throat. Scott stared in disbelief. The creature could enter the alternate dimension itself. He conjured a great spherical illusion to peer inside the gem. The world within was barren and empty. The sky above it, however, swelled with those same roiling red clouds. Slytherin did not appear at first. Scott watched and waited. When hunger came, He plucked and ate one of the apples growing on the small island in the center of the gem's lake. "You planted those apples?" Scott asked between bites. "I did," Merlin said, conjuring an apple that he took one small bite of before discarding. "But I've eaten them tens of thousands of times. Even the best things grow tiresome after that long." Scott grinned, chewing. "Is that the downside of immortality?" Merlin drifted a lazy circle around him. "Too much time, too many experiences, surprises disappear." He paused, then looked at Scott with a strange, teasing seriousness. "So, what would you choose, Scott?" Scott froze. "You mean I have a choice?" "Maybe," Merlin said, blinking and smiling, and the question hung unanswered. Scott thought of it, but he was young and uncertain. He let the question go for now. Inside the gem, the last of the red light had poured in. The colorless firmament outside recovered its blue, and the golden pillars and chains faded away. But within the alternate world, the red clouds compressed and coalesced until a smaller red dragon reformed, free at last. It opened its mouth and unleashed a roar that slammed into the land, turning soil and rock into turmoil. The ground rolled like mashed potatoes. Black mist surged up from the earth and coalesced into a phantom. "Slytherin hasn't vanished," Scott said, unsurprised. The red dragon's body shrank and reshaped into a human figure. King Arthur's silhouette emerged, or rather, an echo of him. Though a phantom, he was unmistakably King Arthur in posture and bearing. "Long time no see, Slytherin," the phantom's voice rang, steady and full of will. Slytherin, that black-misted apparition, lifted his head. "I didn't expect a turning point at this hour," he said. Arthur extended his right hand and shaped a sword of golden light. Scott squinted. "Excalibur?" Merlin shook his head. "An illusion condensed from memory. It draws on what people remember." "Can he beat Slytherin?" Scott asked. Merlin smiled. "He is King Arthur." No sooner had Merlin spoken than the duel began. Arthur moved with a mastery that made every step and swing exact as if he'd been born for war. Even when Slytherin once occupied Arthur's body, he had shown skill. But this was Arthur himself, and the difference was stark. Slytherin struggled to match the speed and precision. Blows rained down, golden marks marred Slytherin's misty form. He used his black fog to try to erase the wounds and to strike back, but he was on the defensive, clearly disadvantaged. Scott watched the live drama inside the gem, Merlin silent beside him, the raven steady beneath his feet, and the red dragon that had been bound to the sky waiting above. Facing King Arthur's relentless advance, Slytherin had no effective counterattack. He had once again lost the body he had taken from Medea and was reduced to a fractured soul. King Arthur, though also reduced to a soul, manifested the Phantom of the Holy Sword with magic. The blade could deal real harm to Slytherin. Her earlier red dragon form had been terrifying enough. Scott wondered why she hadn't stayed in it. With one breath of dragonfire, she could have ended Slytherin. "She doesn't have that power now," Merlin told him with a smile. "When she was the red dragon of the sky, she could borrow Avalon's power, but she has left her throne." "Throne?" Scott frowned, remembering the pillars and chains in the sky. "I thought it was an imprisonment." Merlin nodded. "It is an imprisonment, and a throne, and a curse." Scott blinked. "I don't understand. How was she able to leave after I threw that gem over?" "It has to do with the curse's terms," Merlin said, and would say no more. Scott shut his mouth and watched the battle unfolding in the alternate space. Slytherin was on the back foot, losing the ability to fight back. Scott still felt uneasy. He remembered what Slytherin had said before the fight. If Arthur's arrival was his turning point, then Slytherin must have had confidence that he could turn it into one. Sure enough, Scott saw his method. The translucent golden holy sword in Arthur's hand pierced the equally transparent chest of Slytherin's soul body. Golden light erupted from within. "Ah!" Slytherin cried out, a crooked smile on his face. Thick black smoke burst from the wound, enveloping both of them. Scott heard a muffled groan from Arthur. The black smoke formed a small, fiercely whirling tornado and then began to shrink. When it dissipated, only Arthur remained. She lowered her head and covered the left half of her face with her hand. When she lowered it, Scott saw her left iris, once blue, was now pure black. Even the whites of the eye had darkened. Black, vein-like streaks marred her left cheek. He realized Slytherin had tried to seize Arthur's power, to take all her soul for himself. The souls of the two had merged. It was unclear which will was dominant. Scott felt lucky Slytherin hadn't tried this on him. Arthur, two-faced, roared upward. The sound contained both her voice and Slytherin's. The black veins on the left side of her face writhed and began crawling toward the right. "So that was your idea," Arthur said, her own voice. "This is delusion," she added, fiercely. "How could the will of a king ever yield?" Red light flickered from the right side of her body and pushed toward the left. The black veins recoiled under its threat. "Blame your teacher, Merlin," Slytherin's voice issued through her. "He taught you to fight with weapons, but you never learned magic. You know nothing of soul research." The black veins exploded in a riot, twisting and coiling around the left side of the soul body, ensnaring the left hand and left leg. Scott glanced again at Merlin. His smile was fixed and unreadable. He held his ornate staff, his hands hidden in wide sleeves, showing no reaction. "That was my choice. It has nothing to do with Merlin," Arthur said. She raised the golden sword Phantom in her right hand. "I am a king and a knight." With a sudden backhand motion, she plunged the blade into the left side of her soul, where the heart would be. "Ah, you're crazy," Slytherin screamed. The black veins began to turn to smoke and dissipate. "I am a king. A king's will never yield," Arthur cried, gripping the hilt until it touched her chest. "You have been dead 1,000 years. Just obey history and disappear with me." Cracks split her soul body and brilliant golden light leaked from them. "I should have disappeared long ago," she said. "I am different from you. I left regrets in life, but I do not regret them, and I never wanted eternal life." The golden light swelled like a sun. The black smoke that tried to cling to her was burned away like sunspots. After a long, shining moment, the light faded, revealing Arthur's golden soul body, almost transparent, as if it might scatter to the wind. "I know you're watching me, Merlin," she said softly. "Next, everything's up to you." A smile crossed her face, then she vanished completely. Scott stared at the empty alternate world in silence. "It's finally over," Merlin said beside him, stretching lazily as if Arthur's disappearance had no effect on him. The casualness unnerved Scott. "It's over? Arthur and Slytherin are both gone?" Scott asked. "Yes," Merlin nodded. "Congratulations. It's finally over. You're no longer bound by prophecy." Scott asked, "Aren't you sad at all?" "Sad?" Merlin tilted his head. "About Arthur?" Scott nodded. Merlin shook his head. "No, it's a good thing for Arthur. She's free." "What does that mean exactly?" Scott wanted answers, but Merlin only smiled. "Let's go to the Sea of Flowers' secret realm," Merlin said. "You'll find the answers there, and you'll get what you want. But hurry, someone else might take your reward." He vanished like a bubble. "Is it Aaron?" Scott reacted, snatching the gem and urging the crow down. As he neared the great oak, he called, "Savannah, get on!" An eagle burst through the branches, landed on the crow's back, and shifted into Savannah. Scott shook the magic staff. Runic circuits appeared, and a strong wind wrapped them. The crow, now aided by the wind, dove toward Avalon's center. Scott quickly told Savannah what had just happened. "Sorry," Savannah said simply. "Aaron was my responsibility." "It wasn't your fault," Scott answered. "It was urgent. It was my idea to take care of him that way, too." Without the red dragon's power in the sky, their flight was still fast. Before long, they were on the small island at the center of the lake, ringed with apple trees. Savannah squatted beside the vines that had bound Aaron's body and touched them. Green light flowed from her fingers. "He only just woke up," she said. "There's still time." She pulled Scott onto the stone slab that led into the Sea of Flowers' secret realm. Light shimmered, and they were at the edge of the sea in the next breath. They saw Aaron walking into a tall white tower in the distance. "Aaron!" Savannah cried, transforming into an eagle and streaking toward the tower. Aaron glanced back and slipped inside. Thorn vines exploded from the ground and coiled around the tall tower, sealing the entrance and forming a dense thorn jungle. Scott transformed into a peregrine falcon and dove after them. Savannah reached the thorn canopy first, but as she tried to fly over, the thorns shot up wildly and blocked her path. She landed on the outskirts and shifted back to human form. The vines writhed like a mass of snakes. Savannah planted her long wooden staff into the ground. Dazzling green light burst out. Fresh growth spread, and a true forest sprang up within the thorn jungle. Trees shot from the soil and quickly became towering giants. The thorn brambles withered under the shade. Savannah leaned on her staff, breathless and unsteady. Scott descended and caught her arm. "You go in," she wheezed. "Don't worry about me." He nodded and pushed forward into the forest. A breeze guided him through the freely growing trunks, and he reached the tower entrance in a few strides. He burst inside. Bang! A crisp sound echoed. Aaron had broken through a magical barrier and was approaching the reactivated Thousand-Mile Eyes, clutching a new magic staff. "Stop," Scott said, pointing his staff. Aaron raised his hands and slowly turned. His grin was bright as ever. "I didn't expect you'd make it. Don't get excited. Don't make a move." Something about Aaron's expression felt off to Scott. He'd always been roguish and smiling, but this felt wrong. Scott checked the magic signature. Avada Kedavra! A blinding green bolt shot from Aaron's staff. Scott was ready. White light flared from his own staff. The air in front of him condensed into a dense steel-like wall. But the green bolt curved before it hit the barrier and came again. A whirlwind yanked Scott upward. The green light pursued in a tight trail. The motion, too precise, too cold, made Scott realize the truth. "Medea," he shouted. The smile drained from Aaron's face. Dodging the green beam, Scott swung his staff. He didn't want to damage the Thousand-Mile Eyes, so he used only a basic stupefy, but it was enough. The body he thought was Aaron moved to evade the stun, and its control over the Avada Kedavra faltered. Scott followed with an Expelliarmus. Aaron couldn't dodge in time and dropped the green strike to raise a shield charm. Scott landed back on his feet. He watched the figure carefully. "Did Lord Voldemort give you the inspiration, Medea?" Scott asked. "I guess you had Aaron carry your Horcrux, and when he was unconscious, you took over his body." Savannah walked into the tower, shocked. "What is going on?" "Sorry," Scott said. "I think that's what happened." Savannah stared at the figure a long moment. "You're right, Scott," she said, voice tight. "He's not Aaron anymore." Scott felt the need to say it. "I'm sorry." "It's not your fault," Savannah replied quietly. She kept looking at the man who wore Aaron's face. "Help me," Savannah said finally. "I want Aaron to rest here." "Okay," Scott said, nodding. "Be careful," Scott warned Savannah. "Medea might still have a single-use Philosopher's Stone. That would make even Avada Kedavra more dangerous." Savannah smiled. "Don't worry, Avada Kedavra is useless against me." Scott looked at her in surprise but didn't press it. Aaron, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "I didn't expect it to come to this." White porcelain flowed over his skin like liquid. When it covered him completely, Aaron's body reshaped itself into Medea. Scott smiled faintly. "No matter how carefully you plan, you can't predict everything. I had to struggle for this." "Struggle?" Medea laughed. "Hardly. In the end, I misjudged you." Scott inclined his head. "You also misjudged your father." "No, you still don't understand my plan," Medea said earnestly. "I never underestimated him. When it comes to father, overestimation is the only safe approach." "So that's it," Scott said slowly. "You weren't fully confident in your tampering with the ritual. Taking Aaron's body was your backup." "You're wrong again." Medea shook her head. "The real key was your escape from the ritual. In that ritual, the three-way bind was the most stable state. Even father couldn't break free. In other words, seizing Aaron's body had been a secondary insurance." Scott asked, "When did you place King Arthur's Knight's Lance and Mordred's resentment within it?" "Do you think I had a chance to enter Avalon earlier?" Medea smiled. "If I could have, I wouldn't have arranged Zabini to marry Greaves." Scott glanced at Savannah. "We moved too slowly once we entered Avalon." "That's true," Medea said bluntly and explained the origin of the Knight's Lance. "King Arthur's lance that killed Mordred was once a Gaunt family heirloom. I cultivated Mordred's blood and resentment within it for over 1,000 years before it was finally used." Savannah scowled. "That silent forest was your doing too. You polluted the stream, drove the other beasts away, and contaminated an entire unicorn herd." Medea nodded. "I even sacrificed several subordinates to accomplish it." "Destruction is quick," Savannah said. "Do you know how long it will take that forest to recover?" Medea met her gaze without expression and said nothing. Clearly, she had no interest in the subject. Scott felt the surge of Savannah's magic and warned, "Calm down." As a druid priest, Savannah's power was more effective when her emotions were steady. She took a few deep breaths and forced herself to relax. When her aura steadied, Scott exhaled, "I'll hold her." Savannah stepped immediately in front of him. Finish her off in one strike. Scott had no objections. He raised his voice and cast Yggdrasil. But the spell didn't target just him or Savannah. It reached all three of them, including Medea. Scott created an alternate, independent space to prevent Medea from sabotaging the Thousand-Mile Eyes. Medea had already damaged that device's protections once. A deliberate strike could ruin it completely. In a blink, they were separated within that pocket space. Savannah raised her long wooden staff and green light poured out. From the ground, a small forest sprang up. Faces took shape among the trees. The saplings shambled with awkward, deliberate movement. These tree spirits will slow them. Savannah told Scott. They resembled the Oak Guardian. Scott had fashioned by Transfiguration, but with a difference. Scott had transformed trees and animated them. Savannah actually changed their life form with her druid magic. Still, Scott wasn't convinced they could hold Medea long. They were, after all, essentially trees. Medea broke through almost instantly. Fires flared in the forest as she raised her wand and aimed Avada Kedavra at Scott. He glimpsed the red glow in her left hand and knew she had a single-use Philosopher's Stone, enhancing the curse. "Don't dodge," Savannah called, and walked into the path of the green bolt. She slammed her staff into the earth. The surrounding plants shifted their forms and surged toward the curse like a living barrier. But with the stone, Medea's control was fluid. The green bolt bent, slipped between the animated flora, shot up into the sky, and came down on Scott from above. Savannah cried out. Green lights fell like scattered motes, and the plants she had conjured sprouted leaf wings, swarming above and around Scott in a tight defense. Seeing Avada Kedavra thwarted, Medea canceled the charm, flicked her wand, and unleashed fiendfire. Enhanced by the stone, she shaped the inferno into snarling beasts that pounced on the defenders. Savannah's plant lives met their natural destroyer and turned to ash. She kept conjuring more to try to starve the flames. "That's long enough," Scott said. His body flared. A spear formed out of space, an organic branch-shaped lance, the Gungnir, and abruptly tore through the pocket, vanishing as if it had never had a trajectory. Instantly, the fiendfire beasts collapsed into chaotic flame. Medea, who had appeared unharmed, cracked open like porcelain. Scott and Savannah turned in time to see another Medea behind them, falling with a spear through her heart. Savannah's voice trembled. "If you'd been a fraction slower." "No." Scott was calm. "I made this pocket. I controlled the space." He had anticipated Medea's trick. The true body would try a sneak attack from behind. If he couldn't have summoned Gungnir in time, he'd have broken the ritual and used other means. Medea did not die with a scream. She was composed, almost serene. "This will do." She smiled in a way that looked like relief. "After 1,000 years, I no longer know whether this was ambition, obsession, or just habit." Scott watched her and said nothing. Then, simultaneously, cracks spidered through the porcelain skin of the Medea in front of him and through the one behind. Porcelain shards skittered away to reveal Erin's face inside. With her last breath, the exposed body spoke a set of coordinates. "My life's research is stored there. Consider it a gift." As the porcelain shell collapsed, Erin's body slumped among the broken pieces. Scott flicked his wand and Erin's corpse rose, floating beside him. Fiendfire swirled around them. "Let's go." He took Savannah's wrist with one hand and Erin's shoulder with the other. In a blink, they were back inside the tower. Savannah glanced at the still-activated Thousand-Mile Eyes, then edged toward Erin's body. Scott made Gungnir disappear. Savannah used gentle magic to close the corpse's wounds. "You do what you need," she said. "I'll bury him." She picked up the body and left the tower. Scott watched her go without interrupting, and then turned to the gargantuan bronze eye suspended above the machine. Magic flowed into it until the iris glowed and a cascade of images unfolded before his mind. They were not predictions of the next 1,000 years, but the recorded events that had already happened, a full account presented to the final victor. When the light died and the Thousand-Mile Eyes fell silent, Scott rubbed his temples to clear his head. Outside, Savannah was already busy restoring the flower sea, which had been nearly destroyed. She coaxed patches of blooms back into being, bright as stars, filling the scarred ground. Scott hurried to the deep pit Golzon had dug. Thanks to Serene's efforts, a small stagnant lake had formed there. Without intervention, it would soon foul. Scott produced a gem threaded with his magic. Runes unfolded above it and contracted back into the stone. He tossed the gem into the lake, and a spring burst up, clean water bubbling forth. Runes traced themselves beneath his feet and spread into a circuit across the flower sea. The terrain shifted. Water began to flow in a graceful loop around the white tower, creating a continuous stream. "This is good," Savannah said, walking up to him and smiling. "Where is Aaron?" Scott didn't see a grave. Savannah had already carried the body out to a quiet edge of the flower sea, where a small oak sapling had been planted. "He returned to nature," she said. Scott nodded. "And you? Did you gain anything?" "Some significant gains," she answered. Scott searched for words and finally said, "If you don't mind telling me, I'll listen." Savannah conjured a table and chairs woven from flower vines by the water and sat. She handed him a white goblet-shaped bloom filled with clear, fragrant nectar. He took a sip, sweet, delicate, and settled in as Savannah healed and brightened the garden with quiet gestures. He began to recount what he'd seen through the 1,000-mile eyes. It all begins after King Arthur's death. Over 1,000 years ago at Camlin, Arthur and Mordred had fallen, mortally wounded. The 9 fairies of Avalon, led by Morgan, carried Arthur's body back to Avalon. For reasons unknown, Morgan planned to resurrect him. She persuaded 3 fairies to aid her, but 5 opposed the plan, including the twin sisters Teton and Tato. The 9 were split 4 to 5, and conflict followed. On the surface, Morgan prevailed. She separated Arthur's body and soul and used the magic and destiny-charged energy generated, while the 1,000-mile eyes ran to nourish and repair them separately. Her scheme was that in 100 years, body and soul would be restored and reunite, completing the resurrection. With her skill, Morgan assumed she would outlive that span. But the plan wasn't flawless. Morgan failed to eliminate her opponents after achieving victory, and Teton and Tato silently sabotaged the process at a crucial moment. In the end, King Arthur became the unluckiest of them all. The 5 fairies, led by Teton and Tato, finally launched a counterattack. Using their administrative authority over Avalon, they drove the power of the entire secret realm and transformed King Arthur's soul into a red dragon, imprisoning him above the firmament. When Morgan discovered what they had done, another great battle erupted between them. Originally, the fairies all carried bloodlines from magical creatures and lived far longer than ordinary wizards. But this internal war drained them of their strength. Many of them died soon after. Scott paused, lifted his cup of flower-dew tea, and took a sip. Savannah's eyes were full of questions about the story he'd been telling. "But the magic mirror has always been here, hasn't it?" she asked, setting the cup down. "That means Merlin should have known everything that followed." Scott nodded. Savannah pressed on. "Why didn't he stop it? And didn't the fairies also use the 1,000-mile eyes to see their future?" "I don't know what Merlin was thinking either," Scott shrugged. "As for the fairies, maybe they were just too arrogant." Savannah raised an eyebrow. "You mean they knew the 1,000-mile eyes could look into the future, but they didn't actually look? They didn't know." Scott smiled. "Merlin told them it was a device to regulate the circulation of magic across the secret realm, to help Avalon run more smoothly." Savannah's eyes widened. "You mean Merlin lied to the fairies, and they never checked? We can't assume the fairies think like us." Scott sounded a little apologetic. Even to him, the tale seemed far-fetched. Given the fairies' power, he thought, they should have uncovered Merlin's deception if they looked carefully. Morgan, in particular, made active use of the vast magic stored in the 1,000-mile eyes, trying to restore Arthur's body and soul. Yet somehow she never realized the truth. Scott sighed. "Fairies are half-witches with magical creature blood. They live long, and their perspective is different from ours, short-lived humans. Maybe they were so certain of themselves that they simply never considered Merlin as a threat. Merlin, too," he added with a faint smile. "I still don't understand why he did what he did." A voice answered him then, soft and dreamlike. "You said you didn't want to see an unchanging future." Merlin had appeared beside them. The plants at his feet wove themselves into a new wicker chair as he floated down and settled into it, chin in hand and wearing that same inscrutable smile. Scott was not surprised. He picked up the conversation where he'd left off. Merlin nodded. Savannah couldn't help asking, If that's true, why didn't you change King Arthur's fate? He was turned into a red dragon, imprisoned above the firmament. He perished with Salazar. Isn't that tragic? Merlin smiled. How do you not know? That's what he wanted. Savannah's eyes went wide. Why? Because he wanted to be a hero, Merlin said. Scott's eyes flicked with understanding. He wanted to be a hero? Scott repeated. So, Merlin nodded. Yes, exactly as you think. Savannah looked bewildered. But didn't you tell Arthur all the possible endings in his lifetime? You did, Scott said, his voice mixed. But in the end, Arthur chose his own fate. I could have saved him. Merlin was calm. With the faith he inspired in Britain, there were ways to grant him another kind of immortality. He refused. Why? Savannah pressed. He was a king. Why would he accept his death and the fall of his kingdom? Because Arthur was, in a way, a boring man who never changed from his childhood, Merlin replied lightly. Scott cut in. There must have been something greater he chose to sacrifice himself for. For example, keeping Avalon intact. You're perceptive, Scott. Merlin's smile broadened. That's the main reason. Savannah still looked puzzled. What importance does Avalon have? Scott laughed. That's a strange question coming from you, Savannah. Avalon is your druid's sacred ground. Savannah glanced at him. It's sacred to the druids, yes, but I don't see Arthur sacrificing himself for that alone, nor giving up his kingdom and the 9 fairies. Only Merlin could speak the truth. My 1,000-mile eyes didn't just show the present 1,000 years ago, he said. It saw a much further future as well. He paused, then continued. A future where magic disappears. Magic disappears? Savannah looked shocked. Why would magic disappear? Could it be? Her face paled, and she glanced at Scott, seeking contradiction. Scott was composed. I suspected as much. As Muggle technology accelerates and their exploitation of the planet deepens, he said, they'll encroach on the few remaining spaces where wizards can survive. Wizards hiding in the crevices of the world will find it harder to stay hidden. They may be discovered. Savannah frowned. Do you mean wizards would be destroyed if Muggles find them? Do Muggles have power beyond wizards? She didn't accept the idea readily. Scott answered, Have you ever considered how many wizards today come from Muggle families, like me? Savannah's expression shifted. Wizards with ordinary backgrounds wouldn't agree to wage war on Muggles. At least I wouldn't. Scott nodded. Exactly. If I agreed to kill Muggles now, another wizard might point a wand at my parents tomorrow. He turned to Merlin. That's why I founded Babel Tower, to try to create a world just for magic, to separate wizards and Muggles completely. Merlin only smiled. Savannah shook her head slightly. Wait, she said. What does any of this have to do with Arthur's choice 1,000 years ago? Scott smiled. Still not seeing it? Avalon is the key. The existence of this vast secret realm could form the foundation of the magic world, I imagine. It would save me countless years in reaching that goal. Savannah nodded slowly, partially understanding. But Arthur wasn't a wizard. He was a king. How does that connect? Arthur was a wizard, Merlin said simply. He chose to be a knight and a king. Savannah found that hard to accept. Arthur knew what Scott wanted to do? Scott shook his head. Maybe he only wanted Avalon to remain as a refuge for Britain's wizards. No, Savannah was confused. Merlin said he saw a future with no magic. Does that mean Scott fails? No, Merlin smiled enigmatically. Scott is the exception. The 1,000-mile eyes could not observe him. It only showed a future without him. Savannah remembered the prophecy about Scott. He's the non-existent one. The 1,000-mile eyes lost its power to foresee the future. It couldn't see Scott, so all we had was a future without him. Merlin looked at Scott. I am very much looking forward to whatever future you young people create. Whether it leads to survival or to ruin, at least it will not be unchanging. I will always be watching you, Scott. And like a waking dream, Merlin's figure dispersed. I still don't quite understand, Savannah admitted, running a hand through her hair. Merlin was Arthur's mentor. Why would he be so hands-off? And what actually happened after Slytherin entered Avalon? Perhaps Merlin simply respected Arthur's choice, Scott said. He didn't say what he also suspected, that Merlin hated the idea of a fixed, unalterable future so much that he summoned Scott to try to change it. As for Slytherin, Scott explained, the Arthur's soul that Slytherin claimed to see was a fake. The image he pursued was an illusion. The real Arthur had already become a red dragon. Even if Slytherin possessed the king's body, he couldn't inherit all that Arthur was. I think we should go out, Scott said. Can we go out now? Savannah stood and smoothed her hair. Is there nothing more to do here? Didn't you say Avalon is the foundation of your magic world? Through the mirror's communication, I've taken initial control here, Scott answered. There's a lot of work left, and it will take time. For now, we need to go out and tell everyone what happened. He offered Savannah his hand. She picked up her long wooden staff, came to his side, and took his hand. Let's go. In an instant, they left the Flower Sea Sanctuary and stood at the edge of Avalon beneath a giant oak. Scott released Savannah. An unseen wind swirled around them, lifting their bodies. Savannah raised her staff. Green light shimmered as the tightly bound branches folded open to reveal a dark passage. Together, they entered. After a stretch of darkness, their vision cleared, and they heard shouting below. They're out! They came out! Looking down, Scott saw the druids clustered beneath the oak and smiled at old Duarte leading them. He descended gently with Savannah. Old Duarte approached. The wrinkles on his face eased when he saw them. Since you have emerged unharmed, you must have defeated Slytherin. Grandfather, Savannah's voice trembled as tears pricked her eyes. Aaron, he returned to nature. Old Duarte paused a moment, then nodded calmly. I understand, he said. Returning to nature is the rightful rest for us all. He turned his gaze to Scott. You must have been through much in Avalon. I would like to hear exactly what happened. Savannah will tell you, Scott said, then glanced at the dark passage hanging in the air. Under his look, it slowly shrank and vanished. He faced the druids again. From now on, Avalon is under my control. You no longer possess the means to open the passage. Disbelief flickered across the druids' faces. Some even showed hints of anger. Before they could protest, old Duarte raised a hand to quiet them. Wait. His old eyes were fixed on Scott. You owe us a reasonable explanation. Of course. Scott smiled and nodded. A few hours later, Scott left the Oak Sea. The druids would, 1,000 years hence, be the first inhabitants of the Avalon's secret realm. Scott tore through space and returned to his home in Madrid, where his mother Amelia greeted him with a warm embrace. He patted her reassuringly while catching his father Michael's questioning look with a bright smile. He silently told his father that everything had been resolved. Michael nodded. Though reserved, a relieved expression crossed his face. He came forward and enveloped both Scott and Amelia in his arms. That evening, Scott sat alone in his room. On the desk by the window lay the magic mirror and the small blank picture frame. Faces began to appear in the mirror, familiar, comforting, and in the frame a portrait of Ravenclaw mentor filled the space. Good evening, Scott greeted the arrivals. Ravenclaw mentor, Professor Dumbledore, Professor Flitwick, Milton, Roger, Eddie, Luna, Fred, George. Good evening, they answered. After that long, strange journey, Scott had much to share. He spoke and laughed with them, recounting what he could. Outside the window, under a quiet moon, the owl Shay, plumper than before, squinted and dozed, content. My deepest apologies. Too much has happened in the past months, causing the final portion of this text to be delayed again and again. I am very sorry to the readers who have supported me all this time. In short, I am truly sorry. The main story ends here. Extra chapters will be updated starting tomorrow to fill in many remaining unclear details. 576. Bonus 001. 20 years later, autumn 2016. September 1st, the day young witches and wizards returned to school. A gleaming 3-story red bus pulled up to the curb, and Harry stepped lightly down, holding Ginny's hand. 3 children followed behind them. The smallest, a freckled, red-haired girl, pouted and trailed her 2 older brothers with teary eyes. You'll be going to school there soon too, Lily, Harry said, turning to comfort his youngest. 2 more years, Lily complained, deflated. I want to go now. You haven't finished primary yet, said James, a head taller than her, with the impatient confidence of an 11-year-old. Lily shot Ginny a defiant look. Mom didn't go to primary school when she was little. Ginny laughed. I think the ministry's decision to set up preschool classes for young wizards was a wise one. She glanced at Harry. What do you think, love? Harry shrugged. Our Minister for Magic, Miss Granger, will be pleased to hear that. Ginny burst out laughing. Let's go! James shouted an eager invitation toward the new-looking station, and his siblings scampered after him. Slow down, Ginny admonished, and the family moved into the bright, roomy concourse. At the front of the hall, a huge mirror-like screen filled an entire wall, scrolling train schedules and advertisements. Hey! Ron appeared, breathless, with his two children at his heels. Why are you the only ones? Harry asked with a smile. Hermione's swamped with work, Ron shrugged. The Americans have finally agreed to open up. Ilvermorny is going public. Ginny's eyes lit up. That means we'll have 4 major schools of magic. When do they open? I need to interview them. You should ask Hermione, Ron pouted. Dad. Ron's youngest, also called Lily, ran over and hugged Harry's leg, looking up with green eyes. Rose and Hugo went to the Muggle world to play. What's it really like there? Can we go? We want to go too, the two boys chimed. Harry and Ginny exchanged a look and then glanced at Ron. It was George and Fred, Ron said, sounding exasperated. 2 days ago they took the kids to the Muggle world. Harry's face softened with a nostalgic smile. I haven't been to the Muggle world in years because the paperwork for crossing is a pain. We want to go, the 3 children chorused even louder. It depends on your performance, Ginny said sternly. If you behave and do well at school, I'll think about taking you at Christmas. Harry lowered his head and gave Lily a helpless look at her disappointed face. All right, time to go through the station. Ron reminded them, and the group cheerfully moved toward the waiting room. A heavy oak door bore a brass nameplate, British Ministry for Magic, Minister's Office. Hermione hurried down the corridor and knocked. The door opened. Minister Diggory! Cedric, buried in paperwork, looked up. I told you, call me Cedric. This is a workplace, Minister Diggory, Hermione said, deadpan. Cedric smiled helplessly and in mock reciprocation said, All right, Minister Granger. Hermione took that and ran with it. I brought a notice from the Supreme Magical Council. Cedric pushed a sheaf of papers across the desk. It's about the creation of a magical university. A university? Hermione took the documents and began to read. For outstanding graduates of the magic schools who wish to pursue further study, the principal is Scott Trollope? He's going to be the head of the university himself? Look at the faculty list, Cedric said. He's practically poached top professors from every school, including Hogwarts. Hermione scanned the list and her brows knitted. This is outrageous. Cedric tried to soothe her. I know it'll hollow out some departments, but there's not much we can do. Outrageous, Hermione repeated. Why didn't this university exist when I graduated from Hogwarts? She folded the paper and slammed it on the desk. Ask Scott for me, she said. Can people already working in the magical world still go back to university for further study? Could someone like me? That would be unconventional, Cedric said hesitantly. I am the Minister for Magic, Hermione corrected him, forceful, and my goal is to enter the Supreme Magical Council. Cedric blinked, then nodded. All right, I'll ask. Far away, in a secret realm of endless sunshine and fields of flowers, a pure white tower rose beside a lake. At the top of the tower, Scott entertained his guests. 20 years had tempered him into a steadier, more mature man. The eagerness of youth had softened, but his presence remained confident. Welcome. It's been too long, he said, embracing each guest in turn. Professor Dumbledore, Professor Flitwick, Professor Roussel. When it was Professor Snape's turn, the potions master, in his customary black, declined a hug with a look of disdain and offered only a stiff handshake. I appreciate your initiative to found a university, Snape said in his silky voice. But I expect you to be strict with admissions. Don't adopt the old-school habit of taking on students no brighter than trolls. Of course, Scott promised, we'll admit only the most outstanding graduates. Flitwick, hovering nearby, chuckled. Don't worry, Severus. Only the curious and capable will choose to continue their studies here. Scott motioned everyone to sit. Unfortunately, Professor McGonagall declined my invitation. Dumbledore pursed his lips. Minerva remains headmistress of Hogwarts. She warned me that your transfiguration might embarrass her. I don't plan to teach every subject myself, Scott replied with an easy smile. They turned, at last, to the business that had brought them. The university's curriculum, its standards, and the new era it promised to usher in for magical education. After the last of the guests had gone and the professors had finished discussing the university's curriculum, Scott found himself alone by the window, looking down over the endless sea of flowers. By the shimmering lake, a small herd of unicorns stood in a soft glow, dipping their heads to drink. In an instant, a graceful figure moved among them, bending to stroke the mane of a foal. She wore a simple long dress and a slightly battered straw hat. Only her long, curly hair caught the light, glowing faintly like the unicorn's coats. "You're back." Scott appeared behind her as if stepping through space. "My expert in magical creatures." "Hi, Scott. I'm back." Luna turned with a content smile. 20 years had passed. The childish look that once sat on her face was gone, but her ethereal, eccentric manner remained. She still seemed delightfully at home in her own world, untouched by ordinary concerns. "As of today, all the magical creatures in North America have been relocated to the magic world," she said happily. "You've worked so hard." Scott reached up and lifted the straw hat from her head, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. "No." Luna shook her head. "I was happy to do it." She watched the unicorns again. "I hope all the magical creatures, like us and like them, can start a beautiful new life there." "No problem," Scott said with a smile. "The magic world has plenty of space and a variety of environments. It can be a true new home for them all." Luna nodded, smoky gray eyes fixed on him. "I know. This is your achievement." "No, everyone helped." They walked together along the lakeshore, hand in hand. "The magic worlds in South America and Africa have already contacted us," Scott said softly. "They want to join. After the North American wizards settle in, they'll move over too." Luna brightened. "So only the Eastern wizards are left?" Scott's expression grew more complicated. "Mostly. The Far East should be fine, especially Japan. Milton has been there for a long time. His music has swayed most of the wizards." Luna's lips curved. "I know the only exception." "Huasia," Scott said quietly, his voice carrying the weight the name held for him. "We don't know much about that place." Luna blinked in surprise. "Even Cedric and Cho don't know? I've met wizards and seen magical creatures from Huasia." "Those are people of Chinese descent," Scott explained. "Like Cho, her family left generations ago. She awakened abroad and came to Hogwarts to study. The wizards we've met from Huaxia all have similar backgrounds. They learned magic overseas, but I suspect there's still a deep, traditional power in that land." "Have you tried to contact them?" Luna asked. Scott shook his head. "They aren't keen on joining our magic world. From their reactions, it seems they might have their own alternate realm, something like another magic world." They fell quiet as they reached the White Tower, the conversation naturally ending there. "By the way," Scott said, "the university we planned is ready." "You should prepare your Care of Magical Creatures classroom, Professor Lovegood," he told her. At the new university, students would choose one subject for intensive study for a period of time. Scott had designed a small class system. Each professor would run a single classroom, modeled on research institutes at Muggle universities. "Who else will teach?" Luna asked. "Dumbledore, Flitwick, Snape, Roussel, and many other outstanding wizards from different schools will each have exclusive classrooms to recruit students," Scott said. "We've also integrated the Scholar Alliance's knowledge bank." Luna's eyes lit up. "I can't wait for the first term." "There are more surprises," Scott said, smiling. "We've set up some elective classrooms that only open at certain times each year." "Like who?" she asked. "Milton's magical music, Eddie's magical media studies, Fred and George's economics, Cedric's management, Harry's Quidditch." He listed Friend's elective courses as if naming treasures. It was easy to imagine how lively students' lives would be. They laughed and talked their way to the top floor of the tower. Just before she headed off to shower, Luna turned back. "What's the university called?" "Asgard," Scott answered. "It honors the predecessors of the Asgard School. The knowledge they left behind helped form the magic world." "And your classroom?" "It's called Lambo." Scott said it softly. "That's a beautiful name." Luna smiled. Scott moved to the window again, watching a black raven wheel against the clear sky. With his skill in Transfiguration, he could have made a new Lambo, a perfect copy, even one that carried Lambo's memories, but he had never done it. "Do you miss him?" she asked. After a long moment, Luna emerged from the bathroom, hair still damp, and leaned against him. "I miss him a little, yes," she admitted. "Black Wing Lord was my friend, wasn't he?" "He liked you very much." Scott turned and wrapped his arms around her. "To win, I lost some things." He breathed in the faint floral scent of her hair. but I'm grateful I didn't lose more. Luna slid her hands around his waist and buried her face in his chest. At least I've always been here, she murmured. Scott chuckled softly. Thank you, Luna. How lucky, he thought, to have met you. 578, bonus 003. Lily's Day. I love you, Anna. I love you too, Edward. Lily pressed her flushed cheeks into her hands and watched the handsome man and beautiful woman move slowly across the screen, eyes fixed. Oh, Lily, on the first day of summer vacation, you're watching another one of those sappy shows. Her brother Albus's teasing voice came from behind the sofa. They're so silly, aren't they? And I'm not talking about the stars you like. I'm talking about the characters they play. Shut up, Lily snapped. The romantic moment on the television was instantly ruined, and Lily flounced a little. Albus kept jabbering. Don't they have homework? They're clearly still just magic school students. If they were at Hogwarts, Professor McGonagall would be furious. You're so annoying. Lily leapt up and pounced at him, more play than real bite, intent on giving him a taste of his own medicine. Albus sidestepped easily. While sidestepping, he flicked his wand and changed the TV channel. The magic set immediately burst into the commentator's excited voice over the roar of a stadium crowd. Harry Potter has spotted the golden snitch. He's after it now. Oh, his opponent is right behind him. Look, it's Dad's match. Harry hurtled across the screen on his broom, deft and sure. Albus's eyes lit up and he abandoned teasing, settling back on the sofa, utterly absorbed. Lily, standing behind him, was even more annoyed. She silently raised her wand, planning a quick bit of revenge. Without turning, Albus leaned back and nonchalantly flicked his wand over his shoulder. Expelliarmus! A red jet of light flashed. Lily's wand flew out of her hand and landed neatly in Albus's palm. Albus! Lily shouted, clutching her fists. He turned with an insolent grin. Albus! Came a louder voice from upstairs. Are you bullying your sister again? Ginny clattered down the stairs, hands on her hips. No, Mum, Albus said, shrinking back a little. We were just stopping Lily from watching those lovey-dovey shows. He sounded self-righteous. That kind of nonsense will turn Lily silly, make her fall for some boy at school. I won't, Lily blurted, protesting with more heat than she felt. Ginny softened and sat beside her. Oh, love, you're only in third year at Hogwarts. It's a little early for romance. That's not fair, Lily muttered. Uncle Ron said you liked Dad before you even started first year. Ginny coughed and looked briefly embarrassed. Then she shot Albus a warning glare before smiling at Lily. Back then I was just a bit starstruck. Your dad was famous. Everyone in the magic community admired him. We only officially started going out when I was in 5th year. Aha! Lily must have a boy she likes, Albus said loudly. I don't. Lily stamped her foot. The commentator's high voice flooded the room again. He caught it. Harry Potter has the golden snitch. He wins the match. Lily's anger evaporated. She leaned forward toward the television. The screen showed a close-up of Harry holding the snitch aloft, smiling, older now, 2 deep crow's feet at his eyes, but still an excellent seeker. Is Dad going to retire soon? She asked quietly. Ginny nodded. Yes, this is his last season. Just then the front door opened and a tall figure came in. Oh, did Dad win again? The newcomer's face was bright, youthful, and unmistakably a Potter. James! Lily cried, racing forward to throw her arms around her eldest brother. You're back! How was Asgard University? What's different about it from Hogwarts? Did you find a girlfriend yet? Too many questions, James laughed, tapping her head affectionately. I did write to you. We'll have enchanted calls more often. I want you to tell me everything in person. I'm so curious about it all. With both Ginny and Albus looking expectantly at him, James sat down and prepared to tell them properly. Ask away. Albus wasted no time on the question he cared about most. First, congrats on getting into Professor Trollope's Lambo classroom. Is his teaching as amazing as people say? What does he teach? Can it make you as powerful as him? His eyes shone with admiration whenever Professor Trollope was mentioned. Here we go again, Lily pouted. I don't worship the actors I like that much. Albus rolled his eyes. Those actors are just stars. They can't compare to Professor Trollope. Professor Trollope built an independent magic world. He's the greatest wizard of the 21st century, Lily interrupted, folding her arms. I know, you're always saying that. You. Seeing the argument about to flare, James cut in. All right. Want to hear about Asgard or not? Both kids fell silent, suddenly obedient. James launched into his stories. Asgard has so many brilliant professors and outstanding courses, but the Lambo classroom still gets the most applicants. Professor Trollope sets challenges that test everything: transfiguration, charms, alchemy, you name it. Specifics? Ginny prompted. Nope, that's confidential. In short, he assesses a wizard's overall capabilities. Only 10 students were accepted, and I was one of them, James said, pride clear in his voice. Classes are nothing like Hogwarts. There's less theory and far more hands-on work. We went out into the Muggle world to help wizards who'd originally lived in South America relocate. Next year, we'll be going to a magical institute in the Far East. He described it all with such enthusiasm that Lily and Albus listened like spellbound owls, faces full of envy. Ginny sat back and let the children's chatter carry her away to memories of her own Hogwarts days. Who would have guessed that a former classmate would grow into the most powerful wizard the magical world recognized? James's story time lasted the whole afternoon, only stopping when Harry came home. Still, Lily felt it hadn't been nearly enough. After dinner, she cornered her father, pestering him about his elective at Asgard. Harry smiled but was evasive. You'll find out when you graduate from Hogwarts and go to Asgard, he said. That's ages away, Lily complained. Before I even started at Hogwarts, you didn't tell me how you were sorted. I was so worried I couldn't sleep before school. Everyone in the room laughed. 579, Bonus 004, Noah's Fantasy Journey, Part 1. July 2022, Hastings, England. After breakfast, 11-year-old Noah stepped out into the yard. It was the start of his summer vacation after finishing elementary school, and he was getting ready to go out to sea with his father's fishing boat to feel the waves. Just then, he noticed a man in a strange black robe and a pointed hat standing by the gate. When did he get here? Noah murmured as he approached. Hello, sir, he said politely. Can I help you? The man replied in an even tone. Hello, I'm here for you, Mr. Evans. No, me? Noah looked surprised. Why would a strangely dressed man be looking for him? The man continued. Noah Evans, 11 years old, right? That's me. Noah nodded. He glanced up at the stranger's pale face and dark eyes and felt a little uneasy. At that moment, Noah's father, Tarquin Evans, came out of the house. Tarquin was tall and broad-shouldered, his years at sea making him look older than he was. Who are you? He asked warily, standing between the stranger and his son. I'm Jacob Kent, the man said, a professor from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. I've come to recruit your son. Magic school? Noah's eyes lit up. We're not going, Tarquin said flatly. Noah has already chosen his middle school. We won't allow him to learn any magic. It's real magic, Jacob said, and then, with no warning, he vanished from the gate. Noah and his father spun around. Jacob stood now inside their garden. You should have suspected sooner, he said with a small smile. When a child is a young wizard, strange things happen. No way, so cool. Noah stared at him in amazement. He had been partially won over by the sudden appearance. Tarquin was stunned too. I thought he was just odd, he admitted. Noah's mother, Kala, came out of the house at that moment. Please tell us more about wizards, Mr. Kent, she said, having heard enough from inside to be curious. Of course. Jacob was invited into the house. Hogwarts used to send acceptance letters by owl, but those owls in the Muggle world caused a lot of trouble. Now professors deliver letters in person. He pulled a letter from his pocket and handed it to Noah. Fortunately, Hogwarts only needs to recruit new students in the British Isles. Thank you, madam. He accepted the cup of hot tea Chala offered and gave a casual nod. Noah tore open the envelope. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, he read aloud, eyes scanning the page. Headmistress Minerva McGonagall. Dear Mr. Evans, we are pleased to inform you that your son has been accepted to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Enclosed is a list of required books and equipment. Term begins September 1st. Please follow the professor's guidance for pre-admission preparations. Sincerely, Deputy Head Neville Longbottom. He read the letter twice, then looked at Jacob with wide eyes. Is this real? Can I really learn magic? Of course, Jacob said gently. You know you're different, don't you? Noah nodded eagerly. I break things a lot by accident, and once when I fell into the water, I somehow ended up back on the shore. Yes. Jacob set his teacup down and cut the boy off with a smile. That's because you're a young wizard. Sensing the parents' concern, Jacob pulled a small wooden wand from his pocket, tapped the teacup, and turned it into a small mouse. Oh, Noah and his parents gasped as the mouse scurried. With another motion, Jacob changed the mouse back into a teacup. Young wizards need to learn to control their magic, or it can hurt them, he explained. He went on to describe why attending a magic school was necessary. Tarquin and Chala listened, beginning to understand but still uneasy. What will he do in the future? Chala asked. If he learns magic, will he have a good life? Don't worry, Jacob said calmly. The wizarding world has been peaceful for many years. After graduating from Hogwarts, he could find work in the magical community or continue his studies at a magical university. He gave a brief overview of the world, and Noah hung on every word. When Jacob finally prepared to leave, Noah didn't want him to go. All right then, Jacob said. Meet me in 10 days at the entrance to London's King's Cross station. That will be the only chance you, as parents, will have to visit the wizarding world. With that, he disappeared. Oh, Mom, Dad, do you think that was real? Noah asked, blinking as if to clear his head and make sure he wasn't imagining things. Tarquin and Chala exchanged looks. I think it's real, Chala said. The next 10 days crawled by. When the day came, Noah and his parents took a train to London. In the busy bustle of King's Cross Station, they found Professor Jacob Kent. Several other families were gathered around him, all of them tense and curious. All right, everyone's here, Jacob said. Please follow me. He led them away from the main concourse and platforms to a plain, unmarked door in a quieter corridor. He pushed it open and stepped inside. Good morning, Professor Kent. New students? A young man called from within. Noah followed and saw a spacious hall. Jacob answered, Yes, these are this year's new students and their parents. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Please queue here, the young man said. He introduced himself as Gerber and directed them toward a full-length mirror. Noah went to the front of the line and stared at his reflection, puzzled, when a female voice spoke from the glass. Noah Evans, 2022 Hogwarts new student, passed. Jacob patted Noah's shoulder and moved him aside. Tarquin Evans, parent of new student Noah Evans, passed. This is a necessary procedure to enter the wizarding world, Jacob explained. Your files have already been backed up. After everyone passed the mirror's scrutiny, Jacob led them to the center of the hall. The floor was an intricate pattern of metal inlaid with large gleaming gemstones that caught everyone's eyes. Prepare, Jacob called, raising his wand. We're off. A brilliant white light surrounded them, blinding for a moment. When Noah opened his eyes, Jacob's voice greeted them again. All right, welcome to the new Diagon Alley Plaza. No way. Noah breathed as he and the others looked around in astonishment at the wonders before them. Wow! Noah couldn't help but stare, his mouth hanging open. Everything before him exceeded anything he had imagined. They stood in a small plaza ringed by white pillars. Many such plazas dotted the area, and people would occasionally blink into existence there in a flash of white light. These small plazas served as teleportation arrays and were built around a much larger square. That central plaza was larger than any Noah had seen in London. Tall buildings rose around it, and roads radiated outward. But unlike London, there were no cars, only wizards and witches in robes, walking the streets or flying past on brooms. The facades of the tall buildings were covered with shop signs and advertisements that shifted through colors. Unlike the neon and billboards he remembered, many of these signs were translucent, floating quietly in the air. Only a few ads were physical screens embedded in the structures, and their images were as clear as mirrors. Noah noticed entrances to the dazzling shops weren't limited to the ground level. They layered up the buildings at different heights, accessible only to broom-riding wizards. Follow me. Don't get separated, Professor Jacob Kent called. They stepped out of the teleportation array into the bustling plaza. Passing wizards glanced at Noah's small, out-of-place group and exchanged knowing smiles. Noah muttered under his breath, "We must look like country bumpkins." Professor Kent led them to the fountain in the center of the plaza. It was enormous, and at its heart stood a very tall sculpture, not a person, but a slender, towering column. On closer inspection, each tier of the tower seemed to incorporate architectural styles from around the world. Together, they formed a remarkably harmonious whole. Have you all heard the story of the Babel Tower? Professor Kent asked the new students gathered around him. They all nodded. Of course, they had heard the famous tale. This sculpture commemorates the contribution of the Babel Tower organization to the magic world, he said. In the past, wizards didn't have their own shared realm. They were scattered, living hidden from Muggles. One evening in 1995, a few students at Hogwarts formed a group called the Babel Tower. They wanted to unite wizards and create a world for magic. The group grew, attracting like-minded people from everywhere, Professor Kent continued. Eventually, they used the Avalon Secret Realm, an ancient place left untouched for 1,000 years, as the foundation to build this unique space for the magical community. Today, much of the Babel Tower's ideal has been realized. Avalon? Noah's heart beat faster. He raised his hand. Professor, are Avalon, King Arthur, and Merlin real? Of course, Professor Kent smiled. King Arthur and Merlin truly lived over 1,000 years ago. He lowered his voice, and I've heard Merlin may still be alive. A ripple of excited whispers ran through the new students. Where is he? Can we meet him? Will he teach us? Professor Kent shrugged. I haven't met Merlin either, but there's a popular legend in the magic world. He paused for effect. The students leaned forward. It said Merlin appears in the dreams of children he chooses and speaks with them. If any of you distinguish yourselves, perhaps you'll find his favor. Noah's pulse quickened. He felt, irrationally and thrillingly, that he might be one of the chosen. All right, Professor Kent said, seeing the hopeful faces, and clapped his hands. Now I'll take you to the bank to exchange for wizarding currency, and then we'll buy the books and equipment you need. He led the group away from the fountain. When they left, 4 men seated on the other side of the fountain watched them go and began to talk. That Jacob kid, always entertaining the newcomers, Eddie said, his mustache twitching. Once a lean, dashing figure, Eddie was now middle-aged and a few sizes larger. As one of the magic world's top media moguls, a curl of self-satisfaction lingered about him. Maybe it's true, Scott said with a wry smile. Even he couldn't dismiss the mystery of Merlin, the nightmare of uncertainty that haunted the world. Oh, come on, Roger said, patting Scott on the shoulder. That story has fooled too many children. Besides you and Savannah, no one's actually seen Merlin. Roger, now bearded and a little thicker in the middle, owned a Quidditch club and carried a robust, infectious laugh. Milton, with elegant long hair and an artist's air, watched the children disappear with a fond smile. The 4 men sat talking idly by the fountain, and though any one of them could cause a sensation if they appeared elsewhere, here they blended into the crowd and drew no special attention. Noah followed Professor Kent to the bank and exchanged Muggle currency for galleons at the Goblin Run counter. He walked through the streets with his parents, eyes pulled by every shop. His parents, sticking to the list in Noah's acceptance letter, refused to let him dawdle, so he obediently bought the required books, robes, potion ingredients, and tools. Eager to finish, he reunited with the others to go to the wand shop under Professor Kent's guidance. Now we're heading to Old Diagon Alley, Professor Kent announced as they walked. That used to be Britain's most famous magical shopping street. When we built the new Diagon Alley in the magical realm, we recreated the old street. All the famous shops opened branches in the new district, but old Mr. Ollivander refused to move, he added. They crossed a couple of streets and stopped in front of an old-looking pub. This is the Leaky Cauldron, Professor Kent said. He pushed open the door. In the old days, this pub stood in London. People entered Diagon Alley through it. We kept that little detail for the nostalgia. Good afternoon, Jacob, called a blonde woman from behind the bar. Good afternoon, Hannah, he replied. Professor Kent threaded the group through the pub's noisy crowd to the backyard. He tapped the brick wall with his wand, and the bricks slid aside to reveal the hidden, bustling street beyond.